Hi everyone, this is Danny Doyle. I got a couple comments on my Call of the Armor playthrough asking for a compilation of the unit ratings, so yeah, I figured why not. I've seen other YouTubers do similar things, so here they are. Enjoy. With that being said, let's start with the Lord, Kyuja. I believe I'm pronouncing that correct. I might be pronouncing it wrong, but she is the one who hears the Call of the Armor. She is an armored mage. Well, she's just a lord, but she's an armored mage. She uses staves and dark magic, and she has the Vortex Comb, which it's a rapier. It's a magical rapier. It has 6 might and 80 hit, which is pretty good, and 1-2 range and hits on res. In general, I tend to find Kyuja is, pretty okay. The fact that she is force deployed feels like a benefit more than anything. There are hardly any seize maps in the game. There's a few where she does have to seize, but for the most part, she just ends up being a fairly tanky mage. And when you have access to magic, and therefore inherent 1-2 range and the ability to hit on resistance, being bulky on top of that tends to be a very powerful combination of traits. She also has this unique thing. Well, obviously she has the rapier, or the vortex, which is a rapier, and can therefore be one of the units to deal with armor knights in the early game. Which you do get a hammer fairly early on as well, but it's nice to have options. It is definitely a benefit of her. There's this other really neat trait of hers, which is that you get the Lord's Promotion item at the end of Chapter 4. You actually get it before you get any Master Seals. So theoretically, if you hyper-invest into her in the early game, she can sort of function like a pre-promote, which is pretty nice. And it's not difficult to hyper-invest into her because with staff access, she has access to a pool of experience that no one else is drawing from for the first 3 chapters. As a result, she also ends up getting the early game staffing credit. I tend to find in my playthroughs that I've done, she ends up sort of functioning closer to the early cleric than the Lord for the first 3 maps. And then, of course, you do get an actual cleric, and you can sort of decide what you want to do with them. But instead, she's just sort of like a staffer who can fight and also is pretty tanky. Like 25 HP and 10 defense is very good for this point in the game. The biggest downside that she has is that until promotion, her only weapon type is dark. And dark is not the greatest in terms of the various tomes that we've got. Its accuracy is and as far as I am aware, the only dark tomes that we have in the early game are going to be Vortex, and then eventually we can purchase Flux. We do eventually get more dark tomes as we move further on. The S-rank dark tome is very strong. There's also Lunar Cleave, which you can get in Chapter 19. But you obviously Nosferatu, which really helps with her ability to tank. But as far as the early game, I do think that it is a little bit of a disappointing magic type to be locked into, especially because her skill is only 5. And that in combination with the fact that dark being kind of the axe of the magic triangle means that it has lower accuracy. So her skill doesn't really make up for the lower accuracy. She can face hit issues. But yeah, other than that, I'm pretty high on Kyuja. I think that she is a solid contribution to the team, and honestly, she is a decent target for early game experience, which I tend to think that the Chapter 1 squad, by and large, is somewhat weak. So feeding her a lot of experience, either in terms of kills or just like, again, the staff experience, using staves, like spamming the 1 heal staff you have to sort of like top people off in order to get her experience, are both, I think, pretty viable, because then when she promotes, she gets very good promotion bonuses and access to the entire magic triangle. So she can sort of supplement her hit issues by using lighter anima in order to, have better accuracy, and she can also build those ranks and potentially get things like bolting or whatnot. Yeah, I'm pretty high on this unit. I really like her. Next up, let's talk about Shale, the jagen of the game. I think that Shale is the best unit in the game, and I think he's the best unit in the game by a significant margin. So these are his base stats. The biggest downside that he has is 8 speed, and he has a pretty low speed growth as well, and since he's a jagen, he's also not going to be leveling up very much. 8 speed is fine for the early game. He will actually double quite a lot of things in the first 3 chapters. But then you do get to the point where he starts, the way that he quote-unquote falls off is he starts not doubling. Fortunately, he has 15 base strength, which is a lot. And since he has access to axes and bows, he has the option of the strongest 1-range weapon type, or 1-2 range if you use hand axes, and effective wit damage against flyers. Now, there's not a lot of terrifying flyers in the early game. There's some flyers in Chapter 5. I think Chapter 5 is the first map that has flyers. There's a couple of wyverns that can be pretty difficult to deal with, TBH. And then you get some Pegasuses in Chapter 7, I want to say. But this isn't a game where you end up with like, oh, I want a lot of bow users because there are a lot of scary flyers. This isn't like Engage, where there's like terrifying Pegasuses as early as Chapter 3 and pretty frequently in outdoor maps or something. But the fact that he has access to bows, and not just any bows, but A-rank bows, is very nice for him. First off, it means that he has the longbow at base, which we can't say about our other archer, Flor. But second off, you get the S-rank bow, the Great Arc, in Chapter 3, in a village in Chapter 3. And that, in combination with his very high strength, can really supplement his kill power and make it so that even when he's not doubling, he can start one-shotting. Now, eventually, even that is not going to be enough to one-shot, but thankfully, he's the Jagen. He can hit enemies weak enough that you can have your little scrunklies get the kills. He doesn't need the experience, his stats are good enough, and they do need the experience because their stats are not good enough. So he can sort of like combine with others for kills, and honestly, that's kind of beneficial because you want to grow other units. That being said, I still think Shale is a near auto-deploy in most playthroughs for the entirety of the game, and part of this is that he has a secret event that happens in Chapter 19. I mean, I say secret event, it happens based on him being deployed, where he will, he'll max out his HP and Constitution, which is more of an annoyance than anything because it makes him hard to rescue. And then he'll get a 13-use personal weapon that is 2-3 range and effective against monsters, and very high might. So that, again, supplements his kill power. It lets him be incredibly dangerous against Cyclopses, dragons, various monsters that can be quite difficult to deal with otherwise. Shale is fucking phenomenal. Shale is fucking phenomenal, and yeah. Easily the best unit in the game, to the point that I think in the tier list that I will pull up after I go over everyone, I actually have a tier all to Shale's self, and I think no one other than Shale is going to end up there. Shale, unfortunately, despite the fact that he is such a great unit, and I'm incredibly happy to use him in every single playthrough, and he will be in the Zero Growths playthrough, play a major part because, you know, if he's the best unit in the game in vanilla, then removing growths, which is his like biggest weak point, is just gonna make him better. But I do think he's pretty bad design, and the reason for that is I feel like, to a degree, he invalidates some of the Chapter 1 units, and that's why the Chapter 1 squad feels so bad. So, the next 2 units I do kind of want to talk about as a pair, and that is Sjord and Youngblood. So Youngblood is the strong fighter, and Sjord is the fast fighter. See that he has 8 speed, but he only has 7 strength, as opposed to 9 strength and 6 speed. And if I could show you their growth rates without them being zeros, that would also reflect in terms of Youngblood having higher strength growth, and Sjord having a higher speed growth. This is unfortunate, because Sjord has E-rank axes. If Sjord did not have E-rank axes, he would kind of be just like strictly better than Youngblood. But as it stands, Sjord is probably worse than Youngblood because he's stuck on the Iron Axe, whereas Youngblood can use he gets D-axes, he can use the hammer that we get in Chapter 3, as well as steals earlier, and he's just farther along in the weapon ranks, so even if you want to like use a long-term unit, him being farther along is helpful. I find that weapon rank does not build fast enough in this game for most units, just because it's a fairly short game. It's only 20 maps. A lot of the maps are pretty short, and a lot of units are only doing flunky work on those maps, and so as a result, they don't see a lot of rounds of combat, and they don't get in a lot of weapon rank. So Sjord being stuck at E rank, or starting at E rank, is a real detriment to him. Now, in terms of like the strength and speed, you'll notice that Youngblood really only has like a minor strength lead, right? I would much prefer to have the speed lead of Sjord. So if you do want to invest in one of these two, I do think Sjord is probably the better of them, just because it's nice to have access to a warrior who can double. Although, I guess Sjord goes warrior, in my opinion. I think Sjord wants to go warrior because he doesn't really need the speed bonus you would get from hero, whereas Youngblood probably wants to go hero because his speed can be a little bit lacking. That said, I would not recommend using either of these units long term. I think that they are kind of just filler units for a couple of maps, because yeah, perfect availability is, it's not a huge thing, but it is something that they have that other units don't. And Call of the Armor tends to be a game where a lot of units just sort of are around for a couple of maps and rotate out. Youngblood and Sjord are around for the first, like, 3 or 4 maps. And then, if you get lucky with level ups, if you like what you see, you can keep them around. They'll be, like, filler. If you don't, I think they just sort of rotate out. They bow out in favor of some of the stronger units who will join in later chapters. The fact that they are axe fighters, and Shale also uses axes, in my opinion, makes them feel pretty bad. And the reason for that isn't like, oh, one of every class, because you can use multiple warriors, and in fact, I usually do use multiple warriors. The big issue is that the first 1-2 range weapon you get is a hand axe. Now, if these were soldiers, or if Shale was a non-axe class, like a ranger or something, right? Then they would have the benefit of access to 1-2 range before the jagen does. And I think that would be a pretty cool way to sort of hold the jagen back from being such an over-centralizing unit. As it stands, however, when you get the hand axe in Chapter 2, there's really no reason to give it to either of them. Sorry about that cut, I had something in my throat. But yeah, Youngblood and Sjord, like, they're far from unusable. This game doesn't really have unusable units, but I'm not a fan of either of these guys. I think they end up just sort of being filler units for a couple of maps. And it is disappointing that, like, Shale sort of denies them of their, he steals the good axes from them, right? Even as early as Chapter 2. Next unit that we have that Shale also kind of steals from is Flora. Flora is an archer, and she has 1 more point of speed than Shale. The big thing is that her speed growth is higher, so if you do invest in her and try to train her up, she can start doubling things, whereas Shale is... Shale and Flora are going to double basically the same things in the early game. But if you start investing in Flora and trying to, like, train her up, she'll start doubling some things that he can't. And that is beneficial. However, her strength is so much lower that oftentimes if they're using bows, well, she's using bows, but if he's using bows as well, their damage output will be close to identical to each other, just because, like, he has a 9 strength lead on her. And that's only it, like, their damage output will only be identical, or close to identical, if she doubles and he doesn't. Otherwise, he just, like, outdamages her by a significant amount. The biggest downside to Flora, the biggest way that I feel like Shale really just... I'm not a fan of his design and the way that it affects the Chapter 1 squad. Flora starts with E-rank bows. Now, this means that Shale, who is a bow-based warrior, which I do think is cool, I love that from a design perspective, he can use the longbow and Flora cannot. This feels really bad. I think that Flora should have started with D-rank bows, personally. I think her being unable to use the longbow at base really makes her feel like just a lot worse than she is. I'm not high on her. I don't think she's a particularly good unit. You can invest in her, like you can invest in any unit in Call of the Armor, just because everyone is usable to a degree, and perfect availability is nice. But she is stuck just using bows until promotion. And then you can go ranger with her. You can go sniper if you want, but you shouldn't. You can go ranger with her, and she has access to light brands for 1-2 range. And she has access to a horse, and she can still use bows if you want. And she can use swords if you want. She needs to use swords to get the light brand, but she can use swords, like, if you want 1 range, right? That that being said, it is a pretty long journey to the point where she actually has something over Shale. And that's something being the horse and being access to swords and potentially the light brand. To hit on res with 1-2 range. I really don't like this unit. I used her in a playthrough, and it's like, you invest in her, she turns out fine, right? She turns out as a decent contributor to your army. But bows are, especially in this game, really a niche role. You don't want, like, an army of 5 or 6 bow users. This isn't like FE6 where there's, like, dangerous wyverns in some of the hardest maps of the game, and you just want a lot of people who can shoot down those wyverns. And so, like, you know, training nomads, training warriors, or whatever, can give you the benefit that way. I think that in this game, bows tend to be a pretty niche option. And you do get a couple of other potential candidates for nomad or for sniper later on. And, you know, all of them do have their problems. A trained floor is probably better than the other candidates, but you could also spend that experience training Guu, you could spend that experience training the other 2 units we haven't talked about, or you could use that combat to train Shale's bow rank. Because Shale incentivizes you to want to train his bow rank, but he doesn't have an iron bow, and you kind of don't want to waste longbow uses just attacking enemies that you could attack with an iron bow because you want to train bow rank. I find that oftentimes I'll just hand the iron bow from floor to Shale. Now, you can get a second iron bow on this map, and that is, I think, intended to be Shale's iron bow, but, like, I don't know. If he started with an iron bow and a longbow instead of this guy dropping it, I think floor would feel a lot better to use, because otherwise, I just don't see, I don't see she just feels so bad, is the thing. She just feels so bad. Again, very usable, available all game long, and she can eventually get a horse, but if you put in the work. But there's a couple of other experienced candidates. I mean, we've talked about Kajuna, we talked about Shale being, like, weapon experience candidate, right? And then we've got, of course, Noki. The early game Pegasus is always a good experience candidate. She is the early flyer, and she has the stats you would expect on the early flyer. You know, Chapter 1 flyer, she has flying utility for the entire game. She has very little bulk, 3 defense, 22 HP. She has decent combat in terms of, like, her speed being high enough that she'll double a lot of stuff, although worth noting, she only has 1 more speed than Floor and 2 more speed than Shale, so she does need some training before she has, like, a noticeable speed lead. She does have a very good speed growth, and she will be faster than Floor and Shale if you train her, but her base is not, this isn't like a Shanna situation where she's just doubling everything at base because she's got so much higher speed than everyone around her. Like, Shale's problem is that he is slow, and Noki has 2 more speed than him. So, like, it does take some time for her to have a noticeable speed lead over other people. I find that her strength is often somewhat lacking, and that can hold her back in terms of, like, her combat potential. But she's the early flyer, like earlyflyer.exe. Early flyers are good, early flyers are always going to be good. At the very least in GBA for rescue dropping utility. And Noki has plenty of opportunities to do some rescue dropping and be good in that way. And the last member of the DK crew is Fernandez, and generally knights are not very good in GBA, just because they are slow, they fill a niche that you often don't need to fill, because I find that you're often playing more offensively than defensively in vanilla GBA, just because the games aren't difficult enough to want you to have, like, a choke pointer, and floor movement is a really big detriment. Thankfully, Fernandez has 5 movement. Armor Knights in this game have 5 movement. Generals also have 5, they did the engage thing, but before engage, so, you know, Team Distant Roads did it first. Not as snappy as Kaga did first, but it is still true. And then, obviously, you have the option to go Great Knight, which gets you 6 move, and Canto. So basically an infantry with Canto if you go that route, and that is the route you should go. Just because you still get the weapon triangle, so, like, there's not really a benefit to General. General's pretty bad. Fernandez is pretty bulky. 5 speed, so he's, like, slow, but doesn't really matter because this guy never fucking dies. He has 11 base defense, and his defense growth is high enough that he's just going to maintain impressive physical bulk for the entire game. Now, there does come a point where you value offense more than defense, and you do get other units who are, like, bulky enough. And as a result, like, I've used Fernandez throughout the entire game, and I think he's very usable throughout the entire game, but he doesn't double anything, and in fact, he often gets doubled by things. So his speed is just, like, he's never gonna double things. He's going to, as a result, struggle to secure kills, because unlike Shale, he does not have the insanely high strength and insanely high ranks to get kills by one-shotting. Now, he can, if you, like, potentially, like, you know, take kills that someone has set up for him, or he can, like, use expensive weapons, like the killer lances. There's a lot of killer lances you get access to in this game, and fairly early as well, and silver lances, and the S-rank lance, I think it's called the Pursuer, no, that's the Fate's Bow, but you can use high caliber weapons to make up for the fact that you're not doubling. But at the end of the day, it is still a detriment. Like, there are units who can get kills without using high caliber weapons. And unfortunately, once you get around, like, chapter 13, 14, he's not one of them. Now, he does have Kanto, if you promote him, and he, like I said, he never fucking dies, unless it's to mages. Like, he has no resistance and very fucking piss poor resistance growth. So when I say he never fucking dies, I mean to physical enemies. But that is a very important role in the early game, especially if you are trying to sort of take the map slower and train some of the weaker units that we will get access to that we potentially want to train. I like Fernandez a lot. I think that of the early game squad who's not Shale, Noki and Fernandez are, well, and Kajua, are the most notable of them, with these three kind of feeling middling. And Noki and Fernandez also, I'm not, like, as sold on them as, like, I am on, I mean, Shale is just fucking phenomenal. Let's talk about Daisy first, because Daisy is a very interesting unit, and one of the reasons that I love this hack. Daisy is a Chapter 2 recruit, so she's very similar to Ross, only, you know, she uses lances instead of axes, and as a result, she has access to the Cavalier line, or Knight if you're based, but obviously the main appeal is Cavalier. Daisy's in this really interesting position, where I legitimately think she's the best Cavalier in the game, or at least turns into the best Cavalier in the game. However, she starts as a level 1 recruit. Now, she starts in Chapter 2, and her growths are pretty good outside of her bulk. She'll have really good offenses, and she can become a Cav by, like, Chapter 5 pretty easily. She also has Fire Affinity, which is nice because it gives extra attack, and she has the support option with Killian, who really benefits from that, but we'll get to him. The biggest downside, of course, being, you know, she starts as a recruit, and you do want to penalize units that start as recruits, even in Chapter 2. I do think that there is something to be said for the fact that she's an experience-hungry unit. If you want to use Daisy and use her full potential, she's very experience-hungry. That being said, I usually get her promoted by the start of Chapter 5. I think the latest I've gotten her promoted was the start of Chapter 6, so it's not like it's especially difficult. And she starts with Tam's Harpoon, which is not a personal weapon, but it is quite good for her because it has 90 hit, it's 2 range, so she can attack without being countered, and that lets her sort of secure kills pretty reliably. The biggest downside other than the training arc is this right here. She has no fucking physical bulk. She will actually get fairly decent magical bulk just through her natural resistance growth, but she has no fucking physical bulk until you get her secret event. Her secret event gives her personal weapon, the croissant. I guess not secret event. She has a story event. It's not secret. I need to stop saying secret event when it's not a secret. She has a story event that gets her the croissant, which is a personal weapon that boosts her defenses by, I believe, 3 each. And that can actually make a pretty significant difference in terms of, like, it doesn't seem like it would be a lot, but it does make a decent difference in terms of the amount of enemy phasing that she can do. That, combined with the fact that she does have, like, the extra levels to grow and decent growths, means that her stats outside of the bulk department end up being quite good if you send her down Paladin. Or Knight, but, like, you should send her Paladin. The game's other potential Cavaliers all have problems, and we'll talk about them when we get to them. And as a result, Daisy ends up being, like, I tend to think a very high value unit. I think very, very highly of her. I've used her in all of my playthroughs. Part of that, however, I will fully admit, is because I like trainees. And so I don't just use her because I think she's strong. I do think she's quite strong. But I enjoy trainees. Like, on my first playthrough, I used Gerhardt, who's the axe trainee. On my third playthrough, I used Abdul, who is the pupil. I like trainees. I think they're fun. And as a result, like, I always use Daisy. She's cool. And the fact you get Metastomes right before you get her also just, like, feels really good. Yeah, I like Daisy. I think she's incredibly solid. And her existence is why, in Chapter 1, I dunked on these 3 so hard. And to a lesser extent, Noki is also competing with her for experience, right? It just ends up being... Daisy is very, very experience hungry, and gives you a significantly better payoff than Flora, Sojourn, and Youngblood do. To the extent that Flora, Sojourn, and Youngblood end up feeling like their main purpose is to assist Daisy in growing so that Daisy can then just, like, kick them off the team. Now, all of that being said, that is, not going to be the way that, things function in this playthrough, just because I can't check her growths now because she's a green unit, but, they're all zeros. Speaking of a unit who's, like, not a growths unit, we have another pre-promote in Chapter 2, and he has the stats of a fucking Fire Emblem 11 pre-promote. This guy also has almost no bulk. Now, it's not as big of a bulk problem as Daisy, but because he doesn't grow, like, Daisy has a 30% defense growth, right? Now, I will insist that that 30% defense growth is a lie, but she's a recruit. She's gonna hit that 30 every so often, right? Theoretically, a third of the time, she'll get defense. Which means that theoretically, when she promotes to Cavalier, even before factoring in any sort of promotion bonuses, she's gonna have a higher defense stat than Killian. Because this guy's not gaining XP very fast. He's in this weird situation where he kind of feels like a second Jagen, in that his offenses are not strong enough to, like, reliably one-round a lot of units. So you use him to, like, set up kills for people, right? And he joins alongside Daisy and has a support with her, and plot relevance related to her, so it feels like that was kind of the intended purpose. But Swordmasters get a crit bonus in this game. So, like, he has, like, an inherent crit of, like, 27 on a lot of early game enemies, and you're like, okay, well, do I try to use him as a killer? And if he gets, because he doubles, if he gets a crit on either of the doubles, then he'll kill. Which is, you know, not statistically favored to do, but it's a thing that you can have happen. Or do I use him to set up kills, and if he gets a crit, then I haven't set up the kill properly. And so he's sort of torn between those two roles. And it's very frustrating place for him. And I think that, like, he's useful in his join map, he's useful in a couple of maps afterwards, but then he ends up feeling like more of a burden. And, you know, stats aren't good enough to justify using him for his combat alone, especially, again, the bulk is just fucking awful. His offenses are incredibly unreliable because he does rely on, like, doubling and getting at least one crit to get kills. And you can't even use him to, like, you know, oh, I'll set up a kill for someone because of the crit problem. All of that changes, however, because he also has a story event in Chapter 10, This one, I guess, is kind of a secret event because he does need to do a talk combo, but it's displayed, so not really. But he will promote from Swordmaster to Swordmaster. He gets the Swordmaster promotion bonuses, and it's not really a class change. I mean, it does reset his experience, like he goes back to a level 1 Swordmaster. But he gets the promo bonuses, so his stats end up being a little bit better, which wouldn't be enough to save him on his own. However, he also gets the Bread Knife, which is a 0 might weapon that ignores defense and has an insanely high crit rate. So as a result, it usually ends up dealing true damage equal to his strength times 3 times 2. If he doubles, it's like his strength times 6, so 3 times 2, yeah. This is why the fire support on Daisy is something I find valuable, because it's essentially adding 6 points of damage to Bread Knife attacks. Now, when you get the Bread Knife and you get the stat boosts from the promotion bonus, Killian becomes a walking delete button. He does sort of become a one-trick pony. His bulk is not improved. He's still just really incapable of enemy facing. It is really just the ability to use the Bread Knife to just ignore defense, including like throne bonuses and stuff, right? And double crit and just delete enemies, right? That is the main appeal to him. The Bread Knife is limited in uses, like it is not an infant durability weapon, and as a result, Killian feels limited in uses. But he feels very usable. And you can also, like, because, you know, he has A-rank swords. You can give him silvers, you can give him killers, you can give him, like, Wudao, you can give him the S-rank sword is very attainable for him. And he'll do decent work with all of those. Like, none of that is going to be bad. I really like Killian as well. I think he's a very good unit, but I think he's a very limited good unit. I think that he struggles to be a main member of your army, but he is the best boss killer in the game, and he can function as a delete button at times that you want that. Phillip is a pirate. Phillip is fast. He has 10 base speed and a 60% speed growth. His 8 strength and like 40% strength growth is not great, but it's passable. Like, he ends up having a fairly passable strength stat and a very, very fast speed stat, to the point where, much like Sejurd, I think that Phillip wants to go warrior rather than hero, because he doesn't need the speed that you get from hero, right? And swords aren't a huge benefit in GBA, or at least not in vanilla GBA, which is this very vanilla adjacent. Like, I don't think swords are a huge benefit in quality armor, but I do think bows are, because while I said that flyers are not super common, it's nice to have bow access for the flyers that do exist. And being a warrior that can double is quite beneficial for that reason. Especially in the late game, there's some wyverns you're like, yeah, I'm a warrior who can double with an iron bow, like, let's do it. I like building his bow rank fairly early. I tend to early promo Phillip. Phillip is another unit I really enjoy using, and I tend to early promo him, and then build his bow rank, and I've gotten him to the Great Arc before, which is, yeah, it's not what's going to happen in this playthrough, but it's certainly a fun time. I tend to be pretty high on Phillip. I think he's a very solid contributor. I think that he is, he makes a good argument for early experience over the Axe Bros. If you want a second warrior, you can do a lot worse than Phillip. That being said, it's not like he is an essential unit. I really like him. I think of the early game training projects, he's up there. Noki's probably better, Daisy's probably better, but other than that, I think that he is, he's up there amongst the best of the best, right? But you can make do with the various strong pre-promotes. You know, you get 2 new units every chapter, plus there's the filler paralog units that I'll talk about when we get to that, but I think you will be just fine if you choose not to train Phillip. In the early game, Phillip is quite useful because he has the hammer, and he has the axe rank to use it. Hatchet is E rank, so that's not special for him. But he is able to be... He shares the trait of being fast with the trait of not having fucking E rank axes. Hammer is useful because there are armor knights in the early game. There are armor knights aplenty. The game developers have heard the call of the armor, and being able to kill them with the hammer is nice. Now, Youngblood can also do that. As you'll see, he has the D rank right there. But Youngblood is slow. Now he can double armors. No question about that. But just having the positive qualities of both Shazurd and Youngblood is very nice, I think. Plus he has water walking, which is always nice. And he's not that much weaker than a base level Youngblood. Now obviously you could train Youngblood. But I don't like Youngblood. I think he's stinky. So yeah, Phillip, I'm very high on Phillip. I'm less high on his partner in crime, William. First off, I do need to address William. The funny is William has max con as a result to the fact that he stole a fuck ton of body rings and ate them all in order to max out his constitution. I do think this is a funny gag. I like the idea of not just it's 20 con, but it is 6 plus 14, right? Like, he specifically he stole the Jackson's body rings and used them all, and then his body rejected the last one because he's at capped con. That being said, it does have unfortunate parallels to binge eating. The idea of, being addicted to binge eating. The sprite is a fat sprite. I would not blame anyone for being uncomfortable and finding the portrayal and the humor with this character to be fat-phobic. It is not my personal interpretation of the character, but I do not think that it is an irrational interpretation of the character. And I feel the need to put that out there, in case anyone is offended at William. I think you're fine, I think you're valid. That said, as a unit, William is, also fine and valid. So he's 11 speed, it's speed base, which is actually pretty good for the time. And with 14 con, it means, he's not getting weighed down by his blades, right? He starts with an Iron Blade in his inventory, so he can double a decent number of dude mans with heavy weapons. Unfortunately, his speed growth is 20, and the rest of his growths aren't great either, but the speed growth is relevant because he's a thief. He wants to steal things. There are several stealables that he can't reach at base. Now, in Chapter 6, which is the first time that there's, a really valuable stealable... Well, there's a few really valuable stealables you want with William, but the first time that his speed growth is relevant is Chapter 6, because there is a stealable stat booster. I believe it's a Draco Shield, and it is a roll whether or not base William can steal it. He can steal it, but the enemy has to roll down on speed. And I think that's bad design, because William's the only thief available at that time, and he has a 20% speed growth. I have found myself having to rig speed level ups with William, because the way that the emulator works, in terms of rerolls and stuff, if you reset the emulator, it doesn't do rerolls properly. You have to, suspend. It's weird. The details of random stat distribution and rerolls are weird. I think that the fact that William is not guaranteed to be able to steal that at base, while being the only thief and having a very bad speed growth, which I don't think his bad speed growth is bad. It allows him to sort of phase out. I think that's fine. The design was pretty clearly, in my mind, that he was supposed to phase out for another thief, when we do get other thieves later. I think that him not being guaranteed to steal a stat booster at base feels very bad. It makes the game, it makes it feel less Iron Man friendly, which isn't, I don't think games need to be Iron Man friendly, but it is a frustrating feature of that map. And it feels a lot like Matthew not being able to steal the red gem in Chapter 11. if the thief rolls up on speed. All that being said, like, William is a thief out of 10. He's fine. He steals a couple of notable things. There's a couple of maps with chests that he needs to get to, and he can participate in rescue drops. Like, it's weird. You would think that him being the thief, he's supposed to be the one get rescues, but no, he can participate in rescue drops because of his high con, which is really nice. And his combat's like, it's not great, but he can use heavy weapons to make up for his bad strength, and he can still double with them to an extent. The biggest downside is that because of his constitution, he can't ever be rescued, and that is very unfortunate. It especially is unfortunate because, you know, you want to rescue him around to get him to treasure chests with flyers and stuff, and you just can't do that. So the first one is Ikechukwu. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, and I am terribly sorry. I'm told that it is actually the name of a song, but I don't know what... I haven't looked at the song. He is our first non-Lord staffer. He starts with D rank staffs, which is honestly pretty disappointing for this point in the game. I have C rank already on Kujia, and even if I didn't, like, even if I hadn't been, like, trying to hyper train her, which you can do pretty easily, like, she hasn't even broken her staff, right? D rank is just, it's really low for this time. It's very disappointing. He is too far away from A rank to hit A in a reasonable time span, especially since there are other candidates for being the A rank staffer, because for those who are unaware, you get warp pretty early in this game, and then you can get a lot more warps at Chapter 10. So the benchmark for hitting A rank is usually around Chapter 10, 11-ish. I think he's, like, fine in the early game because you want a second healer sometimes. I don't think that he is an especially good warp candidate. I used him long-term one time, and he hit warp later than some of my other units. And it took more effort, and it was just... And it was worse because his magic stat is abysmal. And his growth isn't great either. Staff bot out of 10, but, like, we already have a staff bot, and it's very unfortunate because we have a staff bot who's just, like, able to do combat and also is bulkier than him and also has a higher staff rank and also is a free deployment. It's really unfortunate. It's a really unfortunate position for him to be in. If he had joined, like, a map or two earlier, like if he was a Chapter 2 unit, I think he would actually be a lot better because then you could use him earlier and, like, focus on doing combat with Kujia, or... Yeah, I'm not super high on this unit. I'm really not. I will use him, but, like, only for a little bit. We do get one other unit. So, the boss of the map will join us at the end of the map. I will throw her stats up on screen because these are not her actual stats, but this is Sovnia. And she is the first playable soldier that we have available to us. In this game, soldiers I can promote either to General or Halberdier as their branch. Halberdiers get a crit bonus, and Generals, and they get a point of movement. And then Generals get the vanilla, sort of like, they're still 5 move, they get the triangle access, and they get, I say vanilla, soldiers don't promote into Generals in vanilla, but they get, extra bulk, extra speed. You go Halberdier. Like, you technically have a choice, but you go Halberdier. That said, Sovnia is just not very good. She has C rank lances, which is nice, but yeah, she's just not very good. She's filler combat for a few maps. Yeah, I'm just not super high on this unit. Part of it is that alongside her, because she joins at the end of this map, so after this is Interlude 1, and you get to pick 2 units from Interlude 1. Alongside her is the potential of joining just, like, a soldier who strictly outclasses her, and while you don't have to choose him, and she does have the benefit of, like, she comes for free, whereas he's the opportunity cost of being part of the Interlude units. She's also just, like, generally going to be worse than at least one of the Interlude units you pick. Probably both of them. Yeah, she's just incredibly middling. Usable, like, but most people are. So let's start with a character who it's pretty obvious that I'm not going to be choosing Gerhardt, but he's not what he's meant for, right? This is a trainee. If you had fun training Daisy, which I tend to, Gerhardt is just Daisy 2.0. So he is in the Journeyman class, which means he has the possible endpoints of either Hero, Warrior, or Berserker, going through Fighter or Pirate, depending on how you want to get there. And he has Fire Affinity, which is pretty good. His growths are okay. I tend to find that he's pretty disappointing. Like, if you're looking for payoff to the training arc, right? I don't necessarily know that it is quote-unquote worth the effort. I don't think you're going to get some sort of like uber powerful unit in comparison to if you just trained at one of the lame Axe Bros or Phillip. That being said, he is probably long-term a better investment than the Youngblood plus Sojourn combo. I do think he's a worse unit, just because he starts out at a lower level. You do need to invest more in order to get him up to pace, and also because he is part of this Aaron versus Samson versus Samson versus Samson versus Samson situation, and as a result, by picking him, you miss out on a more competent unit. That being said, he does have a personal weapon. The Hurlbat is basically Tam's Javelin, or Tam's Harpoon, but for axes, and it is Gerhardt's personal, which is pretty nice. You know, it's locked to 2 range, which, the same thing with Tam's Harpoon, but 90 hit, 6 might, you could do worse, right? And it's 8 weight, which means that he's not weighed down by it. Fire Affinity is nice, I guess, but the main reason you pick Gerhardt is because you trained Daisy, and you got to the end of the training arc, and you've decided, you know what, I want to train another unit. Yeah, he's fine for that. He's fun for that. Yeah, his growths are what they would expect out of a growth unit. Like, they're not, oh my god, I have 80 in everything or whatever, but he is an investment project. And if you invest in him, you'll get something. Personally, I think that the fact that he is part of the route choice, right? Part of the Aaron versus Samson versus Samson versus Samson versus Samson, so you have that opportunity cost for picking him. And the fact that, like, he's worse than Daisy even if they joined alongside each other, just because no Cavalier access, generally worse stats. His personal weapon, even though it comes earlier, is worse than hers. I tend to think he's kind of a meme, honestly. I enjoy using Gerhardt, but I think he's one of the lower tier units in the game. And of course, at the moment he has 0 growth, so we won't be picking him for our army. No, we will not. Kim is the first potential Cavalier in the game. And, well, I guess Daisy is technically the first potential Cavalier in the game. Kim is the second potential Cavalier in the game. The second actual Cavalier in the game. Or I guess only potential, because you might not choose her. All of the non-Daisy Cavaliers have some significant issues holding them back, and the biggest thing holding Kim back is her offenses are fucking abysmal. 6 strength and 6 speed are pretty bad for this point in the game, and both her strength and speed growths they're just not up to snuff, right? That being said, she does still have 7 movement, which is nice, Canto, which is nice, and Kim has a legitimate niche in 8 resistance, 12 defense, 26 HP. Kim is incredibly bulky, and she's like got mixed bulk in a way that is extremely rare for this game. Most units tend to either have very good magical bulk or very good physical bulk, but not both. And you see Fernandez with his 0 resistance, but nigh unkillable physical bulk. Although, it's starting to fall off now, but I digress. Kim having mixed bulk is a trait that is fairly unique to her. And as a result of that, and the fact that despite being really bulky, she's not technically armored, she can frontline in a lot of places where your other tanks can't. if you have any generals or great knights who you would want to take on either a group of mixed enemies, or there's an enemy that has like a hammer in it or an armor slayer in it or something, Kim can sort of take on that group and not die. That being said, the enemies won't die either. That is the biggest downside to Kim, is like, you don't really make much progress using her, and sometimes that can be helpful if you're just like, you're trying to hold off a wave, or you just need to chip a little bit and she doesn't take much encounter. That can be fine, but I tend to think that of the Cavaliers, like, I don't know, all of the Cavaliers are disappointing in different ways, and we'll talk about them as we get to them. It's nice that she has an actual niche, but she feels so bad to use just because of how tragic her offenses are. And she's going to get doubled by a lot of things as well, which does eventually start cutting into her bulk. I don't think Kim is particularly good as a long-term unit. Just not really the investment project that you would think an early Cavalier is. First Cavalier, potentially. Maybe you've got Daisy by now. But even if you do, she's level 8, right? So she's definitely closest to being your first paladin. And I guess the level 8 is a bit of a downside too, because she's going to gain experience slower. And so if you do want to try to salvage her pretty lackluster stats, there's a lot more investment to even just roll the dice on that, which is disappointing. Now, it does mean she's only 2 levels away from promoting, but Kim does not feel like the sort of person who you spend your first Master Seal on. Like, if you early promo Kim, then you get a mediocre unit who is also short-term. I think that there are better uses of the first Master Seal. Either, you give it to one of the early game people who you've trained a bunch, or you give it to someone who you want to be a good short-term unit, even though, long-term they won't be great. Which kind of brings us naturally to Vector. Vector is a level 19 Myrmidon, which is incredibly funny. 9 strength is not great, but 12 speed, he's going to double quite a few things. Not everything that you would like him to, but he's going to double quite a few things. And if he gets promoted, suddenly he is, in the short term, better at doing the Killian job than Killian. He's slightly bulkier. He has mixed bulk, but not to the degree that Kim does. 22 HP is a little bit sad, but this defense, you could do worse than this, right? Like, he's only got 3 less defense than Kujia's base. He's not meant to be like a frontliner super bulky guy, but him being bulkier than Killian is notable because they kind of want to do the same thing. Vector is a delete button. Like, he's a pre-promoted swordmaster, in disguise as a Myrmidon. You don't pick Vector if you don't plan on using the first Master Seal on him. And you get the first Master Seal, I believe, next map? It's either in a village or dropped by the boss, I can't remember which. But Vector is pre-promote in disguise. Or I guess build your own pre-promote. The downside of Vector is that if you're not planning on using the first seal on him, kind of a throwaway pick. Because you do have to leave 3 of the units behind. And so if you just have him as a Myrmidon, he's pretty much worse than Killian. Unless you want his inventory, which I haven't really talked about, but sometimes there is the pick of, I pick this unit not because I think the unit is particularly good, but because I think their inventory is particularly good. And Vector's Blade is an A-rank sword with 80 critical. So you can basically guarantee a crit with this thing. Now, it only has 10 durability, but it's not unique to Vector. So, if you are hyper-investing in a sword unit, perhaps you want another 10 delete button uses with Killian, Vector's Blade is more than capable of doing that. It is only 10 durability, which is unfortunate, and it is the only item in his inventory. Well, I guess he has a vulnerary, but like, oh no, a vulnerary, woohoo. But yeah, this is another benefit to picking him. Now, it's not something I give him credit for as a unit, but it is something to bear in mind when making the decision between the 5 units. And I guess Kim's inventory, it has a Killer Lance and a Light Rune, which is mostly money, although I can see niche situations where Light Runes come up. Light Runes are fun to use, even though they're not great. As far as Vector as a unit, being like a short-term unit that is really resource hungry, like when I say really resource hungry, it's not that he needs a lot of resources, he needs one specific resource, the first Master Seal, or he's not worth using. So it really is just a matter of like, do you want a unit who will temporarily be better than Killian until Killian gets the bread knife? And if so, are you willing to spend a Master Seal on him? And the answer to that question will, of course, just depend from player to player, team to team, playthrough to playthrough. I've used him even outside of 0% growth playthroughs, and I wasn't disappointed, but that's because I knew what I was going in for, right? Like, I didn't think I was picking out a long-term member of the team. I wanted someone to help out a little bit. Also, Vector's baldness is portrayed as, like, it just makes his hair skin color, and I think that's very funny. He didn't get, like, a custom sprite or anything. Speaking of inventory, and we got the Killer Lance on Guru. Guru is more than just a Killer Lance. We do eventually get a soldier who's just a Killer Lance, but Guru is more than just a Killer Lance. Guru actually has pretty decent combat stats. He's the unit who I alluded to in the previous map when we were talking about Sonvia. Guru kind of just like strictly outclasses her. If we want to compare the two of them, he is faster, stronger, and bulkier with the exception of she has 1 point of resistance. He is also, I believe, the same level, yeah, so... Is he faster, actually? He's 9 speed compared to her 7. Yeah, he is faster. So, in just about every way, he is better than her. His offensive stats are also pretty good, both in terms of, like, his bases being a 9-10 for strength and speed, are decent for the time, and his growths are not terrible. I think that he ends up just sort of slotting into a lot of armies. If you're not looking for a hard carry, but you're looking for a solid role player, he can kind of do that. He is, it's tempting to be like, oh, soldier all around average. And average tends, like, balanced, quote unquote, tends not to be great in Fire Emblem, but he doesn't really have any notable downsides. I guess he's not as bulky as perhaps some of the other units that we've talked about, Fernandez, for example, Kim, for example, but it's not like he's going to fall over to a stiff breeze. Like, 6 defense is fine at this point in the game, and his defense growth, while not phenomenal, like, he'll keep up to an extent, and then, much like many Call of the Armor units, he will eventually bow out and get replaced by someone stronger, unless you want to, like, be incredibly based and just roll up with 5 halberdiers. Yeah, I think Guru is mostly fine. The biggest downside to Guru is that you're picking him instead of some other units. And not even that he's necessarily strictly worse than the other units in this choice. It just feels bad to pick a guy who doesn't really have anything special about him. Like, he's just a combat guy. Doesn't feel like he's filling any sort of special niches. I guess Halberdier does get the crit bonus, which is nice, but as opposed to, like, we've got everyone else feels special to an extent. Gerhardt is a trainee. Kim is a cavalier, which is always good. Vector is build your own pre-promote. And the last unit, Luen, is a monster and is also a pre-promote. So you're choosing the growths unit over the pre-promotes, but you're not choosing the trainee. It's weird. He's in this weird spot where, like, he is technically a better unit than Gerhardt, by a pretty significant degree, but he feels more out of place because Gerhardt knows what he is. Gerhardt knows, I'm a trainee. I'm not supposed to be a great unit. I'm an investment project and the reward is training. Guru kind of doesn't. He's sort of torn between a bunch of pre-promotes you could pick instead of him, or a better training project. I guess kind of held up on soldier meme status. A lot of people consider, like I've said it before, I think soldier bias is a stronger force than waifu bias. People are more likely to give favoritism to soldiers than they are to cute girls. And honestly, I mean, I can see it sometimes. I like Soldier and Cota the Burger King, for example. But, I guess that is the appeal that he has, and him being pretty serviceable is, it's a benefit, right? You know, like, his combat is appreciated for a time, and if you are okay with just having a guy who sticks around and then eventually leaves, to get replaced by a different guy who's short-term, you know, sort of the thing that 0% growth ends up doing, Guru is, you could do worse than Guru. You could also do better, but you could do worse. The last unit we have here is Luen, and I haven't actually used Luen in any growths playthroughs, so a lot of this is a little bit speculation rather than experience, but I do think from looking at his stats and growths that I can get a general idea. Her, I think. Gorgons are usually female, right? So looking at her stats and her growths, I can get a general expectation. Luen is a pre-promoted magic user, so she has 6 movement, which is promoted infantry move, so it's not like, I always feel like they're supposed to have mounted movement, like Gorgons, because, you know, they're monsters, they're half snake, and the centaurs, which are half horse, have mounted movement, but I guess snakes aren't technically a mount. So yeah, Luen is basically just druid under another name. She has 5 magic, which is pretty sad. At this point in the game, I mean, Kazuna has a better magic base, and Kazuna's your only magic user at this point in the game, but presumably you've invested in her a little bit, and she'll end up being even more outclassing in terms of magic. This is made up for a little bit by the fact that Luen has 13 speed at base. Being a pre-promote and having not the greatest of growths, Luen is not really an investment target. She's more of a, this is a pre-promote, right? But she's pre-promote with a number of pretty noticeable flaws. Her bulk it's pretty bad. 2 defense is just not where you want to be. 26 HP, like, she's definitely better than Daisy in the bulk department, with the fucking 18 HP, 0 defense, but yeah, it doesn't feel great, and yes, I do know that mages tend to be frail, and I don't want to discount her entirely for that, but you're choosing between her and some units who have, like I said that Vector ends up not being super bulky, and he has 5 more defense than her, and is also, you know, able to gain speed off of promoting, and end up being, like, he's almost as fast as her at base, and if you give him a seal, then he ends up being, or no, he doesn't gain speed on promo. For some reason, FE8 Swordmasters don't gain speed on promo, which is cringe, but he's almost as fast as her. So that point remains at least. Now, of course, hitting on resistance and doubling it's a good combination, right? It's the fact that she will double people who Kazua will not can help to supplement her damage output. She also comes with the only copy of stone in her inventory, so if you want to do a, like, I'm making this pick just for inventories, you can do worse than stone. You can do better, like stone is only 5 durability, but I don't know, stone is a cool spell. It's 3 range and has the option to petrify. I think that's kind of neat. Overall, Luen is, I think she's fine, much like I said with Vector, much like I said with Guru. She's a unit who you pick and you don't think she's going to be in your army long term. I do say that upon realizing that you get 2 new mages in the next chapter, and then an additional new mage the chapter after that, her appeal of being, like, the second magic user, ends up sort of, it kind of works against her, right? She no longer feels special because, oh, I don't have anyone else other than Kazua who can hit on resistance, right? And she's gonna be fast and she's gonna double people, right? You get some other mages who can double very, very soon afterwards. So, yeah, I think the biggest benefit to picking her is stone. It's not that she's not good. 14 skill is also quite nice in terms of helping to make up for the hit deficiencies that Dark Tomes can face. You know, you can help her actually hit things with stone, for example. it does kind of suck that she is a promoted unit, so she's not really going to be gaining experience and leveling up as much as you would expect her to. And you can't promote her to gain staff. She's always just going to be an offensive unit. Most of the other mages in the game, in fact, most promoted magic classes have access to staves. I struggle to think of one in GBA that doesn't. Summoner has staves, Druids has staves, Mage Knight and Valkyrie have staff, Bishop have staff, yeah. So Luen being a pre-promoted mage that doesn't have staff access is just another mark against her. I think that the only reason you would really take her is if you are really desperate for another, like, taking her doesn't necessarily mean putting her on your team, right? If you want the stone, you probably take Luen, and maybe don't even put her on your team. I don't think she's like terrible. She's very usable. It just she feels inferior, I guess, to the other options you have for mages. Yeah, that is the biggest thing. The speed is a nice benefit. The speed is definitely a nice benefit. The lack of bulk, even for a mage, this bulk is not where I want it to be. Not where I would want it to be. But let's talk about the two new units we got. They are a paired set of units, kind of like Christmas Cavaliers or the Axe Bros that we got in Chapter 1. This is Mac and Hazel. They are monks. Mac is the high magic monk, and Hazel is the high speed monk. There are a couple of differences between them as well. Mac is a little bit bulkier. I use 5 defense, which is actually pretty high for a mage, with the exception of Kajuna, who, 12 defense because she's promoted. Mac is our bulkiest non-armored mage. So the exception of Kajuna. Mac is our bulkiest non-armored mage at the moment, and, obviously bulkier than if we'd taken the Gorgon, whose name I already forgot, Luen. And bulkier than most of the other mages we will get for the foreseeable future. That being said, the biggest benefit to him is he has a higher magic growth as compared to Hazel, who has the higher speed growth. Now, Hazel, in terms of damage output, can often out-damage Mac just because he'll double a lot of people that Mac does not double. And much like with Luen, the low magic can be sort of offset by doubling. But Mac... So, he's a level 5 monk. 5 levels from now, he will promote and get C-rank staves. That high magic benefits him not just in terms of combat, but also in terms of staff range. And their bases and growths correspond with each other, right? Like Mac has a slightly higher defense growth, slightly higher magic growth. There's 5% higher defense, but then it's I think it's 20% higher magic growth than his brother does. They are brothers. So it ends up being this situation where if you want someone to be both a combat unit and a staffer, Mac is probably the better call. If all you care about is combat, then Hazel might be better. But I tend to think that even then, Mac he feels like he has a slight advantage. He has better resistance in addition to defense, so he's just better at enemy phasing. And his speed, it's good enough to not get doubled usually. Which is fine-ish. He shouldn't be enemy facing anyway. Even though he is quote-unquote the bulkiest of the mages, he's still only got 5 defense and 25 HP, right? So the big upside to Mac is that you can get him to warp, if you can get him to warp, right? Which I don't think takes that much work, because with Viable Rescue, you can spam Rescue in order to get up to A rank once you hit B rank. If you can get him to warp, he's going to have a decent warp range, and since he's also building his light rank while he's unpromoted, he starts at D.5, he can eventually hit the S rank light tome, which gives plus 10 magic. Now, getting both of these it's tough. Without grinding, it tends to be a very late game thing, but I tend to focus on the staff prior to finishing up the light rank. And just sort of naturally get a little bit of light rank as well. It's super beneficial. I do want to note, it is achievable on an LTC pace. In the 100% growths LTC that Toffee did of this game, which will be linked below in case you're interested in watching that, Mac was able to reach S rank light and A rank warp in time for a map where it was needed. So it's not like you have to slow down an Omega grind, but you do have to be incredibly careful about how you're planning where you're positioning Mac, how much experience he gets and whatnot. And if you're not doing a rigged run, you are going to have to do some amount, like either it shows up super late, or you're gonna have to do some amount of slow play in order to get there. But yeah, I tend to think Mac is better than Hazel, as a result of that. And the first one we have to talk about is Ayir, not the protagonist of Fire Emblem Engage, but the anima mage that we get in Call of the Armor. Ayir is a very interesting unit, because she starts out as a pretty competent anima mage, honestly, like one of the better magic users. Both her speed and magic have decent growths and decent bases. Whereas with other mages, you kind of have to choose one or the other. Like Luen has good speed but bad magic, Mac has good magic but bad speed. Ayir kind of gives you the best of both worlds. Now, she is still incredibly frail, as one would expect of a mage, like 2 defense, 20 HP. She's not taking hits particularly well, but she can be quite effective as a Mage Knight or Sage if you so desire, but Mage Knight is generally the better promotion. But Ayir does have a secret third best promotion, and that is Dancer. There is a secret event in chapter 15, I believe? It might be 16. It's fairly late in the game. No, it's 15. It's 15. She can visit a house. She'll, during preps, be like, hey, this is my home, by the way. This is my home village. And if she visits the house where her grandpa lives, she promotes into a Dancer. That's right, Ayir is a Laura archetype. But unlike Laura, who's mostly relegated to being capture bot and doing some thief utility, like being a capture bait bot, rather, and doing some thief utility in Thracia, Ayir is actually pretty competent as a combat unit beforehand. The biggest thing that dissuades you from investing into her is those stats don't matter when you're a Dancer. She can no longer attack when she's a Dancer, and you definitely want her to be a Dancer for the last portion of the game. It's weird, because I do think that she is probably the best mage training project outside of Mac, and Mac is mostly for, like, staff reasons. If you want a combat mage, Ayir is a very good candidate for that. But she's on a deadline, because she's never going to... Well, I guess you could keep her as a Mage Knight, but probably shouldn't. And, so she's on this weird deadline. Now, by the time that she does turn into a Dancer, you get loaded with pre-promote after pre-promote after pre-promote, and as a result, her absence, or like absence as a combat unit, isn't felt as hard, and so I still don't think it's like a waste to train her. I haven't trained her, I will say that, but I usually end up benching units to make room for her as a Dancer, so it's kind of like units who have trained to make room for her as a Dancer. So it's kind of like, oh, well, you know, she can come off the bench and do that, or she can just like reclass from Mage Knight into Dancer, and that way you don't have to bench anyone. I don't know. I think she's quite good. One of the better units in the game. Very interesting unit to talk about, just in terms of fulfilling those two separate roles, differently from each other. Itoro is less interesting. Itoro is another Cavalier. I mentioned before that I feel like all of the Cavaliers have problems, and Itoro's problem is kind of just being middling. He does actually have decent offenses. His speed and strength growth are both pretty okay. More than pretty okay. His speed growth is definitely good. His strength growth, I would say, is pretty okay. I think he has 60% speed growth, and... No, okay, it's the other way around. He has 60% strength growth and 45% speed growth. So his offenses will maintain pretty well. He lacks bulk, but like the same is true of Daisy until she gets her PRF. The thing is that he lacks the like huge snowball that Daisy has, and as a result, his stats kind of feel a little bit behind hers if you've trained her. I guess he's probably the best low investment Cavalier. His lack of bulk is definitely frustrating, but I don't know. Kim having a legitimate niche as the super bulky Cavalier is something that I find valuable. In comparison, Itoro being kind of just middling. It feels like he is a filler unit in a game where you consistently get more and more powerful pre-promotes handed to you, and you don't really want to field filler units. But Cavalier, 7 movement, valuable. I don't think it's terrible. There is a decent argument to be made, actually, that he is better than Kim simply because his offenses are better and, you know, that could theoretically be more valuable. Kim can overextend more easily, whereas, like, Itoro, if he overextends, he often dies just because 20% defense growth means that he's always going to remain pretty frail. Like, Daisy, at the very least, is supposed to grow out of her frail phase, but Itoro kind of just doesn't. And as a result, he ends up just sort of, like, he becomes Cavalier number 2, Paladin number 2 if you promote him, and then just sort of, like, lags behind, and eventually gets benched, in my experience. I don't think he's terrible, and he at least will kill things, while Kim will not get killed, so it's sort of pick your poison there, right? In terms of, what do you prefer? A Cav who can't kill things, or a Cav who can't, survive things? Which is a bit of an exaggeration. Like, Itoro can survive things, but, Kim fucking never dies. But let's talk about D Sunwing first, because I think that they are... It's a pretty one-sided Arel versus Samson situation, I think. It's not that Taica doesn't have any, upsides to her, but I think that, D Sunwing is far and away the better choice. I think that they have a lot in favor of them. They are a pre-promoted Wyvern Lord. Interestingly, they have a focus on swords as opposed to lances, and as a result, they will probably be your only flyer with a very high sword rank for quite some time, meaning that they can use the Light Brand. The Light Brand in this game functions just like it does in FE8, so it's going to cut their strength in half, but they have 15 strength, which is a very high number. Like, this is the base that Shale has, but on a Wyvern instead of a Warrior. So, you know, the upside is flight, the downside is they don't have access to bows, and specifically the Great Arc, but like bows in general, being able to shoot down flyers is very good. That being said, you know, they've got decent bulk, their speed is somewhat lacking, and their status as a pre-promote and a fairly mediocre speed growth does mean that their speed will remain lacking for quite some time. But I tend to think that they are just a very, very good unit. They end up being a part of my army at least for like half of the game in every playthrough, and they're someone who you can absolutely bring to endgame as well. You will start to notice their stats kind of pale as you start training some other units, but there's only 5 possible flyers in this game, I believe. I might be forgetting someone, but I'm pretty sure there's only 5 possible flyers, and so, yes, you might not use all 5 of them, but they are a fairly free one, and their HP and defense, as well as the fact that you get a second hop-on guard with them, means that they are... I think that they are far and away the best pick. Now, obvious downside, low resistance, it's kind of mostly how it is for Wyverns, and low luck. They do join with a second hop-on guard to sort of help address this problem, but if you, like me, plan on selling some or all of the hop-on cards in order to afford more warp uses, then they're going to be facing low percentage crit from basically every enemy, and that is pretty unfortunate. The other half of the Arel versus Samson route split is Taica. So Taica is a shaman, although she behaves like a thief. On this map, she has the thief AI, and she has several chest keys. Taica is one of only 2 possible candidates to become a summoner. Now, I do think that it's already, you know, a pretty difficult proposition, being like, hey, I know that you could get a pre-promote, but why not get a growth unit instead? But being a summoner, or a potential candidate for summoner, is a step in the right direction for making that choice a lot more even. That being said, there are 2 issues that I have with her. The first is that I do think that summoners are fairly overrated, in vanilla at least. I think that Sacred Stones is an easy enough game that you don't really need the summons, and they mostly just serve as like a movement extension. Movement extension is good, and it's useful on a few maps, but I think that their utility is somewhat overstated. But in Call of the Armor, summons have been nerfed. partially for balance reasons, partially because the large size of the cast means that a blue summon just wasn't possible with the current engine when this game was made. I don't know if it's possible now with this size as well. I'm not super familiar with the ROM hack and stuff, but summons are green instead of blue. The issue with this is now summons go from being a very powerful like enemy baiting tool to summoning a green unit. And you know, you've seen green unit AI. It's not great. So instead you are basically just choosing like, hey, would I rather have a pre-promoted Wyvern or a training project mage? I already have a couple of training project mages, and while Taica's stats are like fine, I'll take the pre-promoted flyer over just a different mage any day. I think that yeah, I think that is a fairly easy ask. So yeah, that is Taica, and to give you an idea of just how lopsided the Aaron versus Samson is, I have never recruited Taica. This will be on my 4th playthrough of the game, and I've gotten Sunwing every single time. But their backstory is also relevant to specifically Abdul's role as a unit, because Abdul's a very, very interesting unit. So he's a trainee, he's the pupil. So he's the 3rd trainee that we get, the last trainee that we get. But he doesn't have good growth. He's sort of Amelia coded in that way, and that his growth rates are they're not good. Like, they're really not good. They are noticeably worse than other growth units. He's kind of jagen statted in terms of his growth rates. He is roughly 30% in every area, at 30 to 35% in most areas, 40% luck and 75% HP, but other than that, basically everything is, 35% magic, 10% skill, 35% speed, 25% defense, 30% resistance. And yet he's supposed to be the trainee, and the reason for that is he used to be a soldier, so he has what you would kind of expect to be Jagen-esque stats in almost everything that would be relevant to him as a soldier, right? Like, if he was a soldier, he'd have good defense, he'd have good speed, he'd have good skill. So he has, like, decent bases in those, even though he doesn't have very good growths. And then he has almost no magic, because he only just started studying magic. I love the way in which the unit himself sort of builds into the character himself builds into the unit, right? Like, they complement each other super, super well. I also love that this is a trainee who's not a young child. Too often in mainline Fire Emblem, you get, like, the trainees are just young children, and the growth units are all young people, and then the old people, they can't grow. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. So that's kind of an ageist sentiment. So Abdul sort of like, well, his growth rates are bad, but he is the trainee, and if you train him, like, law of averages, it's just the Amelia thing, right? Where, like, Amelia is bad, right? And her growths are bad, but she gains a lot of levels, and so it's the quote-unquote room to grow argument. Abdul is also one of only 2 possible units to be a summoner. It takes him longer to get there, and as I talked about last map, I'm not super high on the summoners in Poly Armor. I've actually never made him a summoner. I used him once. I made him a Mage Knight, because he's actually pretty tanky. Like, his 25% defense growth combined with a base of 8, and the defense that he'll gain on promotion, either into Shaman or Super Pupil or Mage, and then again into Mage Knight, which is what I sent him, makes it so that he can be, like, a relatively tanky, or physically tanky, well, he has a decent res growth, but he's mostly physically tanky, 1-2 range unit, right? And he's fast, too, like 12 speed base, and then a decent speed growth, but 35% is not decent, but, like, it's not 5%, right? We do get units later on who have no fucking growth rates there for them. He's fast enough that, like, his speed base will carry him for a while. 12 is not bad when you are a pupil and you're gaining stats, or gaining levels as fast as Abdul is. Like, he's not going to stay at 12 forever. I mean, in this playthrough he will. But Yeah, it's weird that his bases, despite the fact he's a trainee, his bases are kind of the biggest selling point for him. Very interesting unit. He also has Rosada's Chill. It's marked as an E-rank tome, however, I've traded it to other anima mages, and it is a PRF. It's just marked as an E-rank tome. So, you know, there is that as well. I don't actually know if he loses it if he goes into Shaman. I have not tested that, because Shamans can't use anima, but usually units can use their PRF regardless of the class that they're in. So, I don't actually know. And we might find out together, because I genuinely might train Abdul in this playthrough, just because the map he joins in is kind of just a free training ground for whoever you want. Speaking of people we want to train, Lily is the second Pegasus of the game. She's very similar to Noki. She has slightly higher bases, and they have very, very similar growths. Lily has, I think, 5% more speed and 5% less strength growth. Yeah, looking at them side by side, Lily has 5% more speed, 5% less strength. And then she starts at level 5, and her bases are basically, if you auto-leveled Noki 4 levels, you'll get close to Lily's bases. Lily is a little bit bulkier, with 13 res and 6 defense than Noki would be after just 4 levels. The defense in particular is notable because both of them have very poor defense growth rates. But yeah, it's Pegasus number 2, but like, normally Pegasus number 2 is significantly weaker than Pegasus 1 for more than just availability. Here, I think it is mostly just availability. They're very similar units to each other. I like Lily. I feel like I've used Lily in all of my runs, mostly just because, like, it's easier to get stat screwed on someone who starts at level 1 and, like, you're flipping coins more often, versus Lily at least has those bases, right? But Noki is definitely the better unit. She's around longer, and that is the big differentiator. She's around longer. I really like Lily. One thing that is notable about both Lily and Noki is their constitution. Lily has 7, Noki has 6. This is actually pretty decent. She gets slowed down by 1 by the Iron Lance, but because of the Levis Lancia, she has a strong weapon that she doesn't get weighed down by. And so, yeah, the constitution is low, right? But it could be worse. It would be worse in vanilla. Like, if 7 and 8 con in vanilla for a Pegasus, they are getting slowed down, right? But here, they're not. And as a result, debating between Falco Knight versus Wyvern Knight becomes more of an argument, because the constitution isn't necessarily speed if you're using the right weapons. If you're using swords, if you're using Levis Lancia. But I'll talk about Uyama here. Uyama looks like a fairly decent, if a little bit underwhelming, Myrmidon. Sort of like Fear, the training project, who has a little bit of a promise in terms of matching up to the Swordmaster you already have, that being Vector. Or Killian, I guess, but Killian is weird in that I feel like they're not a great comparison, because Killian doesn't want to do regular combat, whereas Uyama can. She's still not the bulkiest thing in the world. Like, 6 defense, 5 resistance looks good for a Swordmaster, but at this point in the game, with a growths context, many of my units would have more bulk than her. That being said, she's very fast. 16 base speed and very decent speed growth means she's never going to get doubled, and often she doubles enemies. She gets the crit bonus if you send a Swordmaster, Silencer if you're base and go Assassin. But the secret is that Uyama is actually not a Myrmidon, nor a Swordmaster, not an Assassin. She's a mage in disguise, because when you talk to her, you get her personal weapon, which is the Wind Edge, a 9 might, 1-2 range sword with the wind effect. Like, it is effective against flyers, it hits on resistance, and I think that, because it has 60 durability, is the primary attacking tool she uses. She can use physical swords, and this is nice if you have high res enemies you want to kill, such as mages, I guess would be the big ones. or if you are worried about going through all 60 uses of the Wind Edge before the end of the game. We are about halfway through the game, but you don't get Hammer'n until chapter 17, and if you're trying to aggressively use Uyama a bunch, you might want to switch to other swords occasionally just so you don't break the Wind Edge before then, but I do tend to think of Uyama as a mage more than Myrmidon, which is funny because it's literally just her personal weapon. I guess she can use Lightbrands and the Wind Sword, because she has the Wind Edge as her personal, but then the Wind Sword is its own thing that anyone can use. But yeah, Uyama is... I like her a lot. She can occasionally feel a little, redundant isn't the right word, but she can struggle to find a place on teams as just yet another infantry unit, who kind of desires a little bit of training, and she's competent from base. You'll see that from this playthrough. She's not going to get in training because she's Zero Growth's moment, but, in a vanilla playthrough, in order to keep up with everyone, she probably wants some training, either on this map or the next one, and that can be a little bit disappointing. Overall, though, I do really like her. She's extremely fast, probably the fastest quote-unquote mage out there, and her personal weapon has crit on it, which is also very good, so yeah. Okay, let's start by talking about our two new units. Vivec is technically from the previous map. He was the boss that we talked to. But since we get him in preps here, and he wasn't on the beginning of the map, I figured talking about him here is better. This is probably the first thing that stands out to most people. This is probably the second, and this is probably the third. He's very good. He's an extremely centralizing unit. So Vivec joins you less than halfway through the game with 20 magic, S-rank anima. He's probably the only S-rank anima user you will ever have, except maybe Abdul, if you hyper-train him. But even then, he starts so low rank, it's hard to get him to S. And C.5 stabs, meaning that he is halfway to B, where he'd get rescue, and then he can spam rescue to get to A, which is warp, and become just a super long-term warper. Now, D rank light is actually pretty unfortunate. I'd kind of prefer he the higher light rank, although I'm sure that was intentional so that he wouldn't be able to get the S rank light tome, which gives plus 10 magic and would give him 15 warp range. As it stands, he has 10, which is very good. The obvious downsides that may have stood out to you even before the weapon ranks. Speed of 5, defense of 5, resistance of 5. Skill of 10 is also not great. His accuracy is going to be a problem if he's ever doing combat. Vivec is an extremely lopsided unit. He just happens to be very good in the areas that are very important for a sage in particular. His offenses are actually generally worse than other trained mages because he's so fucking slow. And he's only going to get one level up, and his growths are 5% across the board. He is a 0% growth unit through and through. But I used him in all 3 of my regular playthroughs, so you bet your booty I'm using him here. He is incredibly good. His assistant, Ansha, not so much. These stats look kind of impressive. She is a pre-promote. For this point in the game, though, it's not where you want to be. 5 defense, first off, very frail. I've said this about most of her sword-locked units, and it remains true for her. Very frail for this point in the game. 16 strength is quite nice, and her rank is A, so she can use the silver sword in her inventory. Resistance is nice, it's a good niche, I guess. There are some scary mages in this game, but speed of 12 is just not cutting it. You have to have better speed than this if your bulk is bad and you're an infantry unit. It's really, really unfortunate. Ansha is in it's this weird situation where at first glance you're like, oh yeah, very strong swordmaster, actually has acceptable stats, unlike Killian and Vector. Very acceptable bases. 16 strength, super high number. 12 doesn't seem that bad. That's Vector's base speed, right? Well, Vector joined in chapter 5. Uyama, who's an unpromoted Myrmidon. Joined the previous map. I believe she has 4 more speed than Ansha. I'm not even deploying her this map. Yeah, she's faster than Uyama. Now obviously she has less strength, but she can make up for that with her personal weapon, which Ansha really can't. She's in a really unfortunate position. Like, no unit is unusable, and there are definitely people significantly worse than her, but you're really going to feel like this is a pre-promote at this point in the game. It's nice to have, like, I usually deploy her this map. Well, she's forced this map, but I usually deploy her, like, next map, and that's about it. It's nice to have the stats, but not as nice as you would think. I'm fairly low on this unit, TBH. Okay, we have 2 new units up here in the top left. I'm gonna talk about Drowen first. So Drowen is the second thief. Somebody has to be the second thief. It's not a glamorous job, but it is an important one, both for a zero growth context and just in general. I think that having a second thief who sort of replaces the first thief and has a higher base speed is a natural part of the Fire Emblem lifespan, and that's kind of where Drowen fits in. He has 15 speed, as opposed to the base 11 that William had. Now, Drowen does not have William's downside of massive constitution, although it does also end up being, you know, it's not an upside, because now he can't use blades, right? He's slowed down if he uses blades. So if you care about being a fast unit that uses blades, well, William doesn't exactly have you there because he has 20% speed growth. But for the short term, I guess William's combat is like more acceptable than Drowen's is. Drowen does have the clam knife to attempt to sort of like make up some of the difference here. It's a Reaver weapon and it is armor effective, so it is like made for killing armor knights. And I guess I can also do some stuff against Great Knights if they have lances, but he's mostly here to be thief number 2. And look at that, he brings his own lockpick, so you know what that means. Ansha? We no longer have need of your services, Mr. Lockpick. 730 gold. I actually don't know if I want to purchase a heal staff with that, or a weapon, or leave it, because there's mend available here. If we sell another 2 single-use door keys, we can get a mend. So, let me think about it. I believe that there's some door keys we can get rid of. There's no keys we can get rid of. Ooh, this one's tricky. Okay. I think we'll figure that out after we talk about Guu. Guu! The meme lord Guu. Of course, Guu is fucking iconic. So Guu is a bone walker. He is functionally just an archer, except for worse, because archers can promote into ranger if they want, but Guu always promotes into, I believe it's called white, but it's functionally sniper. Except for that it takes effective damage from enemy bishops, because enemy bishops have Slayer, which is relevant for a boss in the late game. Not that Guu, like, wants to fight enemy bishops, because he has no resistance. He has a weirdly high amount of defense for an archer. Like, his best stat is his defense, but he's a late game archer, or a halfway through, a mid-game archer, he doesn't even have the benefit of being able to go ranger. Like, we're gonna get another shitty archer in the interlude 2, or at least have the option to get a shitty archer who can go ranger. There's also someone who's already a ranger. We get some pre-promoted snipers very shortly afterwards. Guu doesn't really offer us much. No personal weapons. B-rank bows is nice, and like, 13 strength is something I'm not gonna scoff at this point in time. My army is very lacking though. I feel like most armies don't particularly want Guu. First up is Flint, and he is sort of the poster child for this particular group of units. Pretty commonly considered to be the best amongst them. He starts with A-rank staves, and we just got a bunch of warp staves, and we've been focusing super hard on barrier and rescue and mend usage in order to raise Mac and Vivec's staff rank. Kujia kind of got there naturally, but I was using a lot of healing on her, so I don't know if that would be considered spamming or not. A lot of the healing was necessary, but I did definitely heal her a few times specifically just to get experience or staff experience. Whereas Flint just shows up with it for free. So that's really, really good. Just a free warper is generally better than anything else you're going to get in this match of units in most playthroughs. In an LTC context, absolutely the best of the bunch. No contest, you're picking him every single time if you care about LTCing or going fast. And I don't even necessarily think that he's a bad pick for slow going, because like warp is still quite useful, even if you're just warping around to like get a side objective easier, right? You know, like you saw me, I used warp to steal a red gem. So you can find your uses for it even if you're not trying to save turns. That said, his stats are kind of dookie, right? Like 8 magic, that means that before promotion, he has 4 warp range. After promotion, he's 5 warp range. That's not very good. Like, that is not very good. We have a better warp range on 0% Mac, and remember, in a Groats context, Mac would have a much higher warp range. We have a better warp range on 0% Groats Kujia, and remember, in Groats context, she would also have a higher one. Now, he is unpromoted, so you can just immediately feed him a Master Seal in order to boost him up to Bishop, and that gives him, I believe, just 1 more warp range because he has +2 magic on promotion, which is nice. He's not really a combat unit. Like, he does have speed. He has magic and speed, sort of like a balance between the two of them. He'll have a lower, taunt rank, and the primary reason he's here is for the staffing. So he makes the argument, do you need another warper compared to the ones that you potentially already have? We already have 2, and we're gonna get a 3rd one very, very, very soon. And then there are some other warpers that we get that we don't have recruited yet, right? Because Vivec is the one who I say we're gonna get very soon, but we have him, he just hasn't hit warp yet. There are a couple units that have warp for free that are gonna, or, either have warp for free or are closer to warp that show up relatively soon. So Flint asks the question, like, how much do you actually need a warp staff? And oftentimes the answer is more than you need everyone else who's here. But otherwise he doesn't really have too much to offer. The fact that he needs a Master Seal in order to see combat is definitely a little bit tragic, but we did just steal a Master Seal, and there's quite a few more Master Seals coming up in the next map. There's one that we could get here in the interlude, and then there are 2 that we definitely get in the next map. So it's not like we're at a point in the game where Master Seals are in super duper high command. Which is why Sir Kandi's big claim to fame being the pre-promote of the bunch is not necessarily upside you might think it is. Now, her already being promoted and therefore having her horse is definitely a benefit over starting out as an archer and needing a seal to become a ranger or sniper if you're based. But it's not like there are so many units demanding Master Seals right now that you are tight and can't make someone else into a ranger, right? As a result, Sir Kandi is kind of just like a mid pre-promote. Like, her stats are just not as good as you want them to be. 11 strength, 14 speed is fine, asterisk. Like, it's not great. Her only 1-2 range option as well is the light brand, which we do have, but like, I don't know. I kind of like that on my flyer. Like, D Sunwing makes very good use of 1-2 range with the light brand. Well, I guess Wind Sword too, like magical swords, right? Magical swords are her sort of bread and butter, and she does have the rank for them. B rank and C rank are decent, and if you just had an archer and promoted them, you wouldn't have a good sword rank. If you just had a mercenary and promoted them, you wouldn't have a good bow rank. So she kind of offers sort of the all-around package. Her skill is fine, her speed is fine, her strength is fine, her bulk is fine and mixed, and her luck is, like, good enough she probably doesn't need a Hop Guard unless you're facing a killer weapon. The other claim to fame she has is Yagensi, hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Yagensi is basically like a personal silver bow. It's 2 less might than the silver bow, but it's also 10 more hit. I guess it's kind of like a slightly redone silver bow because like it has more hit but less might. It's basically fine. Like, it's a pretty good weapon. But it doesn't do anything special for you. You know, it doesn't have any inherent crit, which we saw the chill sort of opened up some new strategies with that, using the crits. It doesn't give any boosting properties. It's just a generically good weapon. And that's fitting because she's just a generically, I wouldn't even say good, generically mid unit. Like, she makes the case for like, hey, you don't want to spend money on a Master Seal, you just want a capable filler unit, that's fine, that's me. You didn't train floor? I can be your floor. Meanwhile, Liam also has a personal weapon. And it does give him something special. Additional bulk, mixed bulk. Better mixed bulk than Sirkandi. He also has better strength than her, and that's before eating a Master Seal, which he can do immediately in order to become a ranger with mostly better stats than her. I say mostly because his speed it leaves something to be desired. Let's just say that. 9 speed at base, even after you account for either sniper or ranger promotion bonuses. It's not cutting it. Like, Liam is not doubling anything, and as the game goes on, especially because his speed growth is not especially good, he will get doubled, and that will cut into his bulk. Liam is, in many ways, Armored Bow the unit, because 7 defense and 1 resistance is not especially tanky, but when he has the Armored Bow equipped, he gets 1-2 range, very high might, flyer effective weapon, and he's now got 11 in both of his defensive stats as his basis, right? So he becomes this sort of frontlining 1-2 range, usually Nomad, but you can make him a sniper. But he also has 30 durability. You can use other weapons with him. I've used him in a playthrough. I used him alongside Floor, and while Floor was doubling everything, Liam was getting doubled by everything. But he could still use other weapons in order to sort of like conserve the Armored Bow for when he needed to enemy face. Of course, he has D-rank bows, so if you want to use some of the very good bows that are not the Armored Bow, you know, if you want to use the Brave Bow, the Great Arc, the Killer Bow even, like, he needs either the weapon rank he gains from promotion or weapon rank that he gains from being used, or both, depending on the rank of the bow you want to use. Being an archer at this point in the game with D-rank bows is actually incredibly tragic, and I do think that D-rank bows holds him back more than 9 speed, although the 9 speed is definitely also an extremely sad downside. That said, Liam starts at level 10. If you promote him, he offers you not a strictly better unit than Sirkandi, but better in most aspects. He's bulkier with the Armored Bow, and he has that mixed bulk with the Armored Bow. And he's slower, but like, not so much slower that you're like, God, this awful piece of garbage compared to like the actual speed god Sirkandi. They're kind of just both slower than you would want them to be, and he's even slower than that. But otherwise, he is oftentimes, he feels like he has more of a niche than her, like as being sort of like the reliable tank. He's almost, I mean, he even says in the dialogue, he wants to be a bow armor, and he kind of is. He's slow, he's bulky, he hits hard. The main reason I think that he is an archer instead of a bow armor is that there were no new classes added to this game other than Kuja. Everything else is vanilla Sacred Stones classes. Well, Halberdier too. So yeah, that's probably the logic. Like, he is a bow armor for all intents and purposes, but he gets to break out of that Armor Knight 4 move zone and get himself a horse. Now, we've got to admit, it is still a ranger horse, right? So it's not quite paladin horse, but it's also not a great knight horse, so it does have one more than that. And as a result, he ends up being, come on, where is he? He ends up being one of the better armor knights in the game, despite not being an armor knight, if you want to think about him that way. Min-maxed in the opposite direction is Bloody Jeb. No defense. This guy is not an armor knight, which makes him cringe. He does, however, have 12 strength and 16 speed. The 12 strength should be familiar, like that is Liam's strength. He's hitting just as hard as Liam, although he offers you some pretty cool weapons. But the 16 speed is new. Like, he, instead of getting doubled by everything, he'll double a lot of stuff. If you promote him to Berserker, he gains even more speed off of that, bringing him up to 17. If you promote him to Warrior, then he can take advantage of his high might and speed to be a warrior that doubles. I talked about the niceness of this with Geese, and how, like, being a warrior that doubles means that he can often just, like, delete flyers that Shale struggles to, or that Floor struggles to, just because high might plus high speed is very, very good. Bloody Jeb basically can do that job, but, like, don't make him frontline. He really fucking doesn't want to. The biggest appeal of picking Bloody Jeb, I believe, is his inventory. Hatchet, Killer Axe, Devil Axe, and Fiend Cleaver are some very good weapons. Yeah, so the big appeal is, like, either you can sell these or use these. This is one of only 2 Killer Axes in the game. This is one of only 2 Hatchets in the game. This is the only Fiend Cleaver in the game, to my knowledge. And I think this is one of 2 Devil Axes. And Jeb offers you all of them on a body who can, like, actually do some stuff, potentially. If you ignore the fact that he cannot fucking survive on the front lines. Now, of course, the downside is, if you want someone to just hit hard, you can get Liam, and you also get several other quite strong infantry units coming up in the upcoming chapters, right? You get some other people who can fulfill that hard-hitting quota. So Jeb ends up being mostly these items that can hand it off to other better people. Still, his inventory is very good, and as a unit, he is immensely usable, and immensely fucking funny. Like, he's a very funny unit. On the topic of someone who you pick for their inventory, Arkel is what is referred to in the community as a pessimist pick. He has a Killer Lance and a Master Seal, and for most people, that is the reason that you pick him. A level 4 soldier, going into chapter 12 of a 20-chapter campaign, is not the greatest proposition, and his growths are fine, but not outstanding. There is an Est in chapter 13, Josie, who has, like, phenomenal growths and sort of says, like, hey, train me. But Arkel, he's not terrible, right? Like, you can train him and he'll turn out fine. He is around the like, decent-ish stats and decent-ish growths. He's very well-rounded, right? But he is a level 4 soldier. So these stats are actually not too far behind people like Bloody Jeb, not you, people like Liam, people like Flint, people like Sukandi. He doesn't look out of place amongst this group in terms of his basis, right? Like, if you look at just him versus Sukandi, it's actually, like, kind of damning for her how close she is to this laughable, memeable Ford soldier. But he's not especially min-maxed, right? He doesn't have the upside that she has of good ranks. He doesn't have the upside that Flint has of being a very good free warper. Doesn't have Liam's bulk. Doesn't have Jeb's offenses. The biggest thing that Arkel offers to you is Killer Lance Master Seal, one of the better possible inventories out there. I did talk about Master Seals not being in super high demand, not being, like, the biggest cost in the world, but part of that comes from the fact that you can get this one from Arkel. If you have a number of unpromoted units and you want a Master Seal for one of them, Arkel is not a terrible pick. This is also one of only 4 possible Killer Lances in the game. All of the possible Killer Lances come from interlude units, and Arkel continues that trend. You might be running out of Killer Lances even if you picked Kim and Garut, and Arkel can be like, hey, here's another one. You got some good lance users on your team, so use this lance. So that's nice for him. But as far as a unit, he's kind of just a meme. Arguably long-term, he's better than Sakandi, just because, like, he has unpromoted level 4 gains. But he is also just a soldier. You know, ROM hack soldier. You can use him. He's fine, but he's kind of laughable. Yeah, just very average, nothing special about him other than, hey, I want to use another soldier. And nothing wrong with using another soldier. His stats could definitely be a lot worse. For a level 4 soldier, these are not terrible stats. Honestly, for an Interlude 2 unit, these are not terrible stats. They're just not distributed especially well. And Sukandi's big upside is, like, she gets a personal weapon and she gets a mount for free. Whereas Arkel can never have a mount and also needs to use a promotion engine to promote. But his stats are like a little bit lower than hers. But again, not as much as you might think. Like, this is a very daring comparison, right? These are not great. So there are 2 recruitable units on this map. We'll talk about Venus first, because she is, I guess, the more on the surface appealing one. She's the first troubadour in the game, and potentially the first mounted mage, because only Abdul and Ayir have the option to go Mage Knight at this point of the people you've recruited. And Troubadour is a pretty good class. Mounted Staffer is always very nice. Even though Valkyrie only gets 7 move on promotion, it is still more movement than Bishops get. And Canto, of course, and the ability to rescue drop with Canto. Very nice, very useful. As a result, she sort of presents herself as like, hey, I know you've already got some established staffers and I'm a training project, but I have a payoff for you. We're getting a pre-promoted Valkyrie with better stats and better ranks in 2 maps, though. So she ends up sort of like falling flat. I'd said C-rank stabs, not terrible, not terribly far away from Warp, especially considering that she will, after 5 levels, get staff ranked from promotion. And she joins with men's staff, which is nice. These stats are not great for this point in the game, but they're not terrible. They're pretty similar to Surkandi, who I kind of dunked on for having very mid-league stats. But that's not really what you assume on a Troubadour, right? Like, a low-level Troubadour is not going to have, like, the same stats or similar stats to, like, a promoted Nomad. So part of it is, you know, she'll gain more stats on getting leveled up. She's stuck on staff experience, but still. And part of it is that, like, just her role that she fills is often not especially stat intensive, so like the kind of nice mixed bulk, the pretty okay magic range, they're all kind of bonuses on top. This is Soma. Soma starts with incredibly good stats, honestly. 17 strength, 15 defense, 22 skill. What's not to love about this? He's even mixed bulk, like he has 14 defense. So most units in this game are either, like, they're very min-maxed bulk in terms of one or the other. Like, your Ansha's very good resistance. Fernandez, very good defense, etc., etc. Soma having the good mixed defenses. Yeah, so he's not phenomenal in either. He will take damage from both. But he's fat HP pool, so he can afford to take damage. Is nice, and it's a fairly unique trait for him. He is, of course, stuck in general, the worst of the promoted classes, because of this number right here, which is pretty unfortunate. This number right here is also only 1 higher than his movement. That's extra unfortunate. Soma's bulk does, much like most of the Armor Knights, kind of get cut into by his speed. I was talking about Liam's speed not being especially good. Soma's speed is even worse. Soma has very good weapon ranks, though. Not lances, but swords and axes. Very good. And honestly, considering the large number of good lance users that we have, like Soma being able to use axes and swords is not terrible. Now granted, we also have a lot of very good sword users in the Swordmaster build that I've currently got going on. But A-rank axes is quite nice. Like, Shale is kind of the only competition for axes at this point. He even comes with, like, the Brave Axe that he can use, which is very nice. Soma will also get a personal weapon. I believe it's called the Spirit Hammer. It targets resistance. It's effective against mages and armor knights, I think. It's a really weird personal weapon. And if you're using Soma, the Spirit Hammer is like a big appeal to his toolkit. That in addition to just like very good stats for the time, other than his speed and movement. But speed and movement are pretty important stats, and 17 Constitution means that we're often going to struggle to get him to the front lines. Yeah, he's very good at getting rescued. He's very fat. He won't be weighed down by anything, but yeah, this is not the greatest unit in terms of mobility. And while mobility is like most useful in playing fast, it is still useful in playing slow. So that really can hold him back. In addition to the fact that, like, I hype up his mixed bulk, but I've seen bulkier, especially with the speed cutting into it. Like, yeah, it's not the greatest thing in the world, TBH. And we're gonna talk about Josie first, because she's my favorite, even though she's the worst. Poor Josie, I love her. She's lesbian, which I didn't know until after my first playthrough, even though I already fucking fell in love with this unit, just based on, I don't know, somehow an S worked for me. Normally they don't. But she is a level 3 Wyvern Rider with stats that look like this. And you can't see her growths, but her growths are all in the 70s aside from resistance, because nobody gets to be dual bulky. Honestly, these stats are pretty abysmal. You could certainly do worse at this point in the game, but you'd be hard-pressed to. For context, like, these are her stats, right? Let's take a look at a unit who joined in Chapter 1. More strength than her, and only 2 less speed. Obviously, she's in a better class. She's a Wyvern Rider. And she has absurd growths, as well as a personal weapon that is brave. But, yeah, Josie's not very good, at base. Josie's not very good at base. This is Chapter 13, and she has those stats. Like, it's a tragic situation. But, if you're willing to put in the work, she will snowball, because that's what S's do. Does this make her a good unit? No! No, it does not. Do I use her every playthrough? Yes. Yes, I do. And it's not like the traditional, like, you know, they're gonna be bad the entire playthrough thing, right? She is much closer to, I'm trying to think of a strong S. I can't really think of any. She joins early enough that it's fairly easy to get her trained up and promoted in a couple of chapters. Now, you do have to play slow to do this, and, you know, you're going to be setting up kills for her. But if you're willing to put in the work, she can turn into a gem. She's still not very good, but she's good if you train her. You know, they were good in my run. Good if you give her all the favoritism in the world. I give her the Metis Tomes from Chapter 11, and I also save literally every stat booster for her, because I fucking love this unit. But that doesn't make her good, that makes her the product of favoritism. Just putting that out there. But try using her, she's fun. Subjectively. People who are also, I mean, they exist. I wouldn't necessarily say they're good. I wouldn't say they're bad either. You might know what I have planned for Adine based on her inventory. She doesn't start with these, by the way. She starts with the Steel Blade. This is Adine. Her stats are fine. She's the first mercenary you get, so you can make her into either a hero or a bow knight. You obviously have options for, like, since you have archers and fighters, you have options for both of those before her, but she's the first one who's, like, starts as a mercenary, I guess, would be the thing. Her strength is fine, her speed is fine, her bulk is pretty shaky, TBH, 35 HP, 7 defense, 3 res, she's not exactly where you want to be, and her speed is slower than you would like for this point in the game, and her speed growth is pretty abysmal. She's going to struggle to double things, and she will end up getting doubled if you are not lucky, or if she's facing the wrong enemy type. And that is rough. She's rough. She's rough to use. Rough along the edges. She can make a fine filler unit. If you want some combat, go hero. She can get a horse, which is a relatively rare trait. You know, we got a couple of paladins, we got a couple of archers, but if you didn't want to train Floor, if you didn't pick either of the potential bow knights from the second split, and all the paladins have issues with them, then she can be a horse girl. But she has bow knight horse, so it's lower move. It's only 7. Yeah, she's fine. Like, she's just a decent filler unit. Nothing really special about her. I used her once. I used all 3 of them alongside each other. All 3 of the units who joined this map, and sort of support triangled them up with each other. And she was consistently slower than Floor, who I was using in that same playthrough. Just because her speed growth is just, it's on the struggle bus, right? But she's fine if you just need someone to fill in the slots. She's in this awkward situation where she shows up too late to be useful in the early game. And then starting next map, we're going to start getting hammered with really, really strong units for the end game. And she just sort of like doesn't have a place to go. And the same is true of Burdock, but to a greater degree. So he's really min-maxed, right? You see, he's the armor knight of all time. 15 defense, 17 strength, but only 8 speed and 3 resistance. Like, this guy is physically tanky, hits hard, literally will never double anything. I wouldn't say he never fucking dies, but he is fairly analogous to a trained Fernandez. Like, if we take a look at Fernandez has slightly less defense than him. On average, if you, like, superpower Fernandez, he'll probably be a little bit bulkier than Burdock, but not to the extent that it makes, like, a huge difference. And if you don't feel like using Fernandez in the early game, and you want a great knight for the second half of the game, Burdock can sort of fulfill that role, right? He's got really massive HP, decent defense, and he's ready for promotion right away. The problem is, if you don't feel like using Fernandez in the first half of the game, you probably also don't feel like using him for the second half of the game. The first third of Call the Armor is Fernandez's most useful segment. So this is like Burdock if he didn't have Fernandez's most useful segment, and is only around for, like, the tail end, where you're kind of sick of Fernandez, right? I'm not a huge fan of Burdock. He is pretty comparable to Fernandez, but missing out on the highs of the early game it really hurts him. It feels bad. It feels bad. We have 2 new units with us. The first of which is Frances, and you'll notice that I have her deployed, which might give you an indication of how I feel about her versus her other person who I don't have deployed. Frances is quite freaking good. These stats are, well, you'll notice that she has plus 10 on magic, and I guess I should talk about judgment, because she joins with it. It is the S rank light tone, and it boosts magic by 10, and she has the rank for it. And at this point, it is fairly unlikely that even one of your monks has the rank for it. This is part of what elevates Mac above other potential warpers, is that he can realistically get both A rank stabs and S rank light. Although you do kind of have to focus down in order to do so, and it's going to come later than Frances having S rank light and B rank stats, because she can rescue with her increased magic range. Now, without judgment, her stats are kind of mediocre. 10 magic for a level 10 pre-promote in a growth context is just not it. That's not it. And her bulk is virtually non-existent. 3 defense, 18 HP, 12 speed. Most things double her, and most physical things one-shot her. She does have an incredibly high resistance stat, but she's also not the type of unit you want to fight mages with. Ansha can sort of use that as a niche to attack mages, and Liam as well, because, like, he has high resistance with the armored bow. But both of them use physical weapons, whereas Frances is using a magical weapon off of a not great magical stat. Even boosting, right? Like, 20 magic is okay. But then you are using an 8 might tome in order to make use of that 20 magic. The big reason you use Judgment is specifically so that she can have a higher rescue range, which is most of what I'm going to be using her for. Still, I think she's much better than Ponticaire. I think she's a very good unit. Ponticaire, I think, is actually kind of trash. One of the worst units in the game, in my opinion. So, these are his stats as a pre-promoted sniper. Already an uphill battle to start out as a sniper when we've had options of multiple archers who could go Bow Knight. Liam in particular can go Bow Knight without any training. And obviously Skirhandi starts out as a Bow Knight. Bows I already think are a fairly niche weapon type. We've got Shale, who's a bow user. The big thing that Ponticaire brings to the table is he joins with A-rank bows and the Brave Bow, but the Brave Bow is B-rank. So Skirhandi can use that at base because she starts out with the rank for it. So not a great showing for him. I kind of dunked on Skirhandi's stats as being like kind of just middling. Ponticaire does have a very high speed and skill stat, so he will often double, even with the Brave Bow weighing him down a little bit, right? He will still often double. 16 speed is nothing to scoff at, but 9 strength is very pathetic. And honestly, if you want to double, give the Brave Bow to someone with a lower speed stat and higher strength stat, right? Because I guess he could quad. He is getting -4 to his speed from the Brave Bow, though. And then that's just 12, and that's not a very good number. Like, that's not a number I like a lot. That's not a number I like in terms of a base speed. 12 AS is... I mean, it's okay, but he's not going to double everything. Or quad everything. He will double everything if he uses the Brave Bow. If he has other bows, he will double, but he won't be hitting super hard. For comparison, we got Guu a while ago. This is what his strength looks like at base. He has 4 strength on Ponticaire. Now, yes, Ponticaire has double his speed. But, like, I really think it's a tough sell being a sniper, even with the bow, like the boosted bows that we get, like the Sleep Bow and the Guidant Bow and other, like, cool, useful bows. I guess the one thing is that Ponticaire can realistically eventually get to Great Arc, but like Shale has had Great Arc for this entire freaking time and also has 15 base strength. And again, like, I know Ponticaire will double a lot of things, but I also don't care. Like, he doesn't hit hard. He doesn't hit hard at all. It's so sad. It's so sad for him. I keep calling him Ponticaire. It's Poincaire. But I don't care, is the point. And we have 2 new units to talk about. The first one is Maluj. Maluj is, well, a level 1 archer who joins in Chapter 15 with these stats. Right off the bat, seems pretty bad. Funny enough, her stats are not actually that different from Poincaire, who we got last map. She has 1 less strength and 6 less speed. And then a couple other, like, differences, but those are the big ones, right? Because archers are the offense one. She is sort of this game's second est in addition to Josie. Her stats, or her growths, are not as, like, busted as Josie's are, but they're still pretty good. The problem is she's an archer instead of a wyvern, which does limit her potential. She also Joes up 2 chapters later. And she gets her own personal weapon, though, which is nice. Much like Josie gets a brave weapon, she gets Berserk Arch, which is a ballista with 0 might. So you can't really use it for effectiveness, but it applies the Berserk status to whoever it hits. So even if you're not going to train Maluj, which I don't think you should, he. I keep thinking Maluj is female because this is the portrait of a boss of Vision Quest that is female. So I apologize for that. He can use the ballista to berserk enemies on his join map, which, considering this is where we start getting much more common pre-promoted enemies, is honestly not a bad thing for him to do. I do also think if you care enough to raise an archer, like if you're in the market for a sniper, archer, bow knight, whatever, like Maluj is better than Ponker because one, he can get a horse, and two, like his stats are not that much lower and he'll gain experience much faster and he'll outstat Ponker, I guess, if you want. In terms of like how he performs other than that, like if I'm comparing him to the garbage pre-promote sniper from the last map, I think you can tell what my feelings are. I'm not very high on this unit, but Berserk Arch is very fun and funny. On the other hand, the other end of the spectrum, Experis. Oh my god, this unit is fucking phenomenal. If you're wondering why I didn't use the boots last map, it's because I was saving them for a special occasion, and that special occasion is Experis joining us. I think this is one of the better units in the game, despite the fact he joins in Chapter 15. And he is going to likely be our carry for the significant future. So he joins with S-Rank Dark, which is nice because he starts with Retribution in his inventory, which is a 10 Might Lunatome. And then the second S-Rank Tome, which is only available for purchase in a shop in Chapter 19, is Lunar Cleave, which is a 1/3 range Eclipse effect. Cut the HP in half. Both of those are very strong, and he just gets them for free. And he's pretty close to the only unit who is realistically going to get S-Rank Dark, other than Kuja, potentially. So that's nice. I guess if you get the mage from the Aaron Samson situation right, instead of D Sunwing in Chapter 7, she could probably get S-Rank Dark. And if you send Abdul into Shaman, he might be able to get S-Rank Dark. But other than that, like, yeah, I don't think anyone else is realistically... Well, Aldrich. Aldrich can, and we'll talk about Aldrich when we get to him. But starting with S-Rank is very strong, because it means you don't have to worry about it. And considering how late we are into the game and how late other potential S-Rank users are going to join, it becomes more and more of a concern to actually be able to grind up your weapon ranks to S. Like, you'll notice that we've been hardcore grinding Mac, and he's still only halfway through A. So getting the weapon experience you need is a big deal. Additionally, Express just has very good base stats. 20 magic, 12 speed, 14 defense, 10 resistance, so like, he's not super Omega mixed bulky, but like, he's mixed bulky enough. You can throw a Nosferatu Tome on him. 12 speed is not great. I've complained about 12 speed with a couple of other units as well, but those units are not using 20 magic S-Rank Dark Tomes, right? If Express is unable to double the enemy, he still hits incredibly hard. Like, we've seen Shale hitting very, very hard despite not being able to double. Express is like that, but magical. I'm really high on this unit. I really like this unit. I don't know what else there is to say about him. He's just got, like, decent stats across the board. And I do plan on giving him a butt ton of stat boosters. But thankfully, we're getting a new run, a replacement, Brioche. Brioche is the last thief, so I gotta be careful with her. She's a pre-promoted rogue, and her stats are pretty good. Like 18 speed, that's her stats. I say her stats. Her stat is pretty good. This is the one that matters. This is the one about stealing. And she doesn't need a lockpick to open chests. We are still gonna keep one lockpick around for Ansha, but otherwise, like we don't need any more lockpicks because it's just Brioche time. Yeah, I think that she is just yet another utility unit, yet another thief. Like, thief number 3 out of 10. Not too much to say about her. I guess if you did care about her combat, like, she has high res, so she can do sort of like the Ansha thing of being a physical unit who can tech mages, which is actually pretty good for this map because there are some scary mages, like these fungers, a lot of mages, a lot of druids, a lot of mage knights, and then there's some mage knight reinforcements that come up here. But mostly Brioche just opens doors, opens chests, steals, for example, there's a goddess icon on this map, on this thief here. And William wouldn't have been able to take that. Drow would, but Brioche also can, and she's a free deploy, so, like, yeah. No personal weapon, but C-rank swords is, like, you can do worse. You can, of course, do better. As I said in the last chapter, it's actually really hard to grind weapon rank at this point in the game, just because there's not that much left. And this is a map where we don't really get to dawdle. Like, there's a 12-turn limit. And then it's game over. So, yeah, it is a little bit rough that she's stuck on, like, killing weapons instead of being able to use Braves. But it's not a unit you use for combat, right? Like, 10 strength, 18 speed is... It's fine that she has them, but the big thing is that open chests and doors. You know, in the immortal words of imported cheese, chests and doors don't fight back. Another utility unit is Weber. Weber joins with A-rank staves, so he can use warp, and he has 7 move, and honestly, he's built like a fucking tank. 43 HP, 17 res, 14 defense. He is extraordinarily bulky. He also has 12 speed. His defensive profile is actually very similar to Express, but he trades the good offenses of Express. He has 10 magic instead of 20, and also doesn't have he doesn't have access to any of the S ranks, and he's never hitting them. Like, you can grind Weber as much as you want. It is extraordinarily unlikely he hits fucking S Anima. C rank tomes is fine, but when thinking about which one of them I wanted to be sort of my carry for the last section of the game, I figured Express was the best. He joins one chapter earlier, and he has better offenses. Even though Weber's defensive profile is like, it's only really better on the magical side and then 3 HP. And then he has extra move, but it's 1 extra move because this is a Sacred Stone's Mage Knight. Kanto, definitely appreciated as well. 12-8 is not great because he's a big boy. But yeah, it's a magical tank. Funny enough, like, he kind of just fills the role that Abdul would if you promoted Abdul to Mage Knight, of being like bulky, fast enough to not get doubled often. Abdul would be faster because Abdul also has 12 base speed and, like, he joins as a fucking pupil. But yeah, just a defensive Mage Knight, which is a really cool role to be in. Low magic, bulky boy. Of course, the upside to Weber is, like, A-rank staves is just something that no one who doesn't start with a staff rank is going to replicate, TBH, especially not at this point in the game. Like, it's just not happening. But we will be using him. Like, he's good. I like him. Let's talk about the first one. And what he asks is your team missing good weapons? He brings you with the S-rank sword, Vague Caddy. There is a second S-rank sword, but it is obtainable through a secret event. This one, 12 might, 3 defense when equipped, and then extra crit boost. And he also brings a crit boosting axe, the Killer Axe. Other than that, his combat is, like, it's acceptable. Like 14 strength, 18 speed, very good offenses, 13 defense, 9 resistance. It's not the greatest mix bulk, but it's acceptable for this point in time. It's like flunky stuff, right? When I recruited him, I never used him. I just used his items, and I feel like that is the common experience. He feels like, of all of the units, he offers you the least outside of inventory. Which there's always one who does that. You know, Guru offers you a good inventory. What's his name? Arkel offers you a good inventory. There's people who are here just for inventory, and Strontium isn't quite that. Like, it's not like he's just meme tier in terms of stats, but you don't really have a huge need for a mediocre hero during the last 4 maps of the game. I think you mostly got your core combat members and even your filler combat members filled out. So Strontium generally I tend to think is not the worst of the units here, but like the least pickable, because I guess Vegcati's nice. I don't think I ever used the Vegcati the one time I picked him. Strontium's not especially good. It's more his weapons, and that is in his description. Like, he's a merchant with a penchant for rare blades. Weirdly, he's marked as the boss of the map. I don't know why that is. Next we have Clothelda. And Clothelda is the late game Falcon Knight, but unlike the Junos of the world, she's actually competent. Her combat stats are quite good. 19 speed, 14 strength, very good offenses. 18 skill means she's rarely going to miss, which you've seen the hit rates we have against some bosses. Very much appreciated. 12 luck, 10 defense, 16 res, like, just all around pretty good. But the biggest thing she offers is she's an 8-move flyer for free. Maybe you didn't pick up D Sunwing. Maybe you didn't train the other Pegasuses. Maybe you didn't train Josie. Like, this game does not offer you a boatload of flyers, so the opportunity to get another promoted flyer is pretty nice, and she does also come with the Killer Lance and the Silver Sword, which are good inventory items. But overall, as a unit, I like her. She is filler combat, but like slightly better filler combat than Strontium, and also on wings. She's not going to blow your socks out of the water in terms of like her combat performance being exceptional, especially because she starts with A rank swords and B rank lances. So she's never getting an S rank in anything, and especially not in lances. Like, you could maybe get S rank swords on her if you focus super hard and also do the like there's a burst of weapon experience event you can do. But it's unlikely. It's very unlikely. And yeah, as a result, she ends up using just generic silvers, generic killers, generic braves, stuff like that, which I won't turn down. You know, unit who can use those quite well. It's better filler combat than Strontium, and it's a better utility, like flyer utility than Strontium. I don't hate it. I don't hate it at all. I very much like this unit as well, but she's not going to blow your socks off. She's not suddenly redefining the meta, especially because she shows up so late. But she's nice while she's around. Someone who will probably blow your socks off is KO. Yeah, I think she's named after cheese because she cheeses the maps. These stats are pretty nice, right? They're okay. But we all know the real reason is this. It's Nime. This is just Nime. Like, she's just Nime. But Nime is a very fucking good unit. And if offered the opportunity to get Nime, like, I feel like KO is, like, the best of these 5, and kind of slam dunk one of the picks. Even more so than Flint, because Flint, like, doesn't really have... I mean, I guess KO 17 is, like... I have better warpers, but, like, I'll always take a free warper. A free warper is very good, and again, at this stage in the game, I have a lot of powerful pre-promotes in a way that I don't, and you typically don't, during Intermission 2. Not having to spend a seal on her to allow her to do, like, a tiny, minuscule amount of combat is also nice. I really, really like this unit. She also brings you physics, sleep, and a secret book, so, like, she comes bearing gifts, and I appreciate all of those gifts. Aldrich is not an S unit. This is the 3rd tier pupil, the final tier of pupil, right? His stats are mediocre. Like, 15 speed and 12 magic. 19 skill, he, again, never fucking misses, or at least, rarely misses. And no bulk to speak of, like, 8 defense, 5 resistance, 35 HP, like, no thank you. Aldrich's big thing that he offers is not just, like, subpar magical flunky combat. He is the only unit of these bunch who's realistically able to reach A rank in a tome of your choosing. He won't ever reach 2, probably, without, like, excessive amounts of grinding, but if you haven't been using Vivec, you can use S-rank Anima on him. If you haven't been using Esperis, you can get S-rank Dark on him. If you haven't been using any of the light users, you can get S-rank Light on him. or if you just want a second user of the S-rank tomes. The problem with that is you don't necessarily want a second user of all those tomes. Oftentimes you could do trading stuff, and you can buy extra of some of the S-ranks in a shop in Chapter 19. But aside from potentially Lunar Cleave, which is very strong, I don't necessarily know that, like, oh, you give him 22 magic to use Judgment, but the real appeal of plus 10 magic on Judgment is, like, the extra staff range. He doesn't have staves. You could either do, like, crit strats, I guess, with the S-rank Thunder Tome, or you could do, like, tanking strats, and, like, Vivec can tank a little bit with plus 5 to his bulk, right? And, like, Aldrich has slightly better bulk, especially because he's not going to get doubled by everything, unlike Vivec. But it's still... You, at this point, have S-rank users, unless they're side-by-side with Aldrich. He's either going to be taking their combat and making it worse, or doing very, very suboptimal combat, and that's with you training his ranks up. That's with you, because he's not there yet, right? The fact that he's close is nice. If you started with all S's, potentially, like, I mean, not just potentially better, like, definitely better, but, like, it elevates him quite a lot. The fact that he has to work to get there means that, at the very least, next map, but potentially for multiple maps, he doesn't have the ability to contribute with these incredibly powerful tomes, and the light one in particular, it just feels wasted on a unit who can't take advantage of the plus 5 staff range. The Anima and Dark ones, like, Dark in particular doesn't care about his stats, other than, like, accuracy. But yeah, I'm not super high on Aldrich either. Maybe, from my analyses, you might be getting an idea of who I plan on picking. But let's talk about the meme unit first. So Delano... First off, he has a Juna Fruit that reduces level when you take it. He's a level 15 Cavalier, does not come with his own promotion item. Hope you saved one. And he's bad. I mean, like, 13 Strength, 11 Speed is, like, it's bad. It's bad. Even when accounting for promotion bonuses, like, you spend a Master Seal on him, and then you get just, like, a Paladin. But the thing that this is covering up that you might have seen, he has 0 luck, and even in vanilla, a 0% luck growth. This guy not only demands a Master Seal from you, but also demands a Hoplon Guard, and he doesn't even offer you a particularly good stats. And he's not really an Est as well, because he doesn't really have good growth rates, right? He's just super... I mean, not even super underleveled. You just have to promote him. Like, he's level 15. He's not going to be gaining super fast experience gain just because he's unpromoted 15, right? He'll be gaining, like, a little bit faster than people around him, but it's not like he's joining at, like, level 5 or something. I guess it is nice that he can instantly go Paladin or Great Knight if you hate yourself. But the real appeal of Delano is he has a secret event in the final map where he gets a personal weapon that is effective against the final boss. It has 1 durability, and it functionally, I think it does half of the boss's HP, which is pretty good, all things considered. There is also a weapon that can do half of the boss's HP, but also is around before the final map. And can be used by people other than Delano, and deals half of any enemy's final HP, and that is Lunar Cleave, which I wouldn't say strictly outclasses Delano, because Lunar Cleave deals half of current HP, whereas you could combine it with Delano to kill the boss for free. But it is certainly not a great case for him, shall we say. That his one gimmick, the final map thing, is somewhat replicable by other units. But we have 2 units to talk about. First is Bardell. He is kind of the archetypal big smash with big axe man. This is basically the only relevant number for him. He has 23 strength. He also has S rank axes, which is good because the end game, the S rank axe, is it's pretty good, and it boosts his speed too, to the point where like with the end game he can actually reasonably double at 19 speed a certain number of enemies. Of course, he also just has a Brave Axe that he can use as well as the Brave Axe that we have on Soma. Bardell crushes the enemy, and that's about it. 18 luck is nice, so he like doesn't face crit that often, and 52 HP is, you know, it's like the Berserker thing, right? Where like they pretend that they're bulky, but their defenses are not great. But his HP is really high. He can take a few hits. Much like Soma, Bardell is never getting rescued anywhere, but he at least has regular infantry move. Well, we can't see it here because he's green, but he has regular infantry move because he's Berserker. And that's pretty cool. Not much else to say about him. He's one of the gods, just like Daisy is. Not you. Seer. Seer is a little bit more interesting because she sort of looks like another Est. Her defense growth is 105% and her resistance growth is 200%. So she's going to be getting bulky very, very quickly. And the rest of her growths are fairly decent, like 150 HP, 80% strength, 50% skill. Luck at 15 and speed at 35 are the only bad ones. But defensively, she's going to gain at least 1 point of defense and always 2 points of resistance every level up. And she even has a chance to gain 2 defense. This in combination with the Dragonstone bonuses, which she has 2 different variants of. Firestone's 1-2 range, but gives less bonus. Dragonstone is 1 range and effective against monsters, and it gives bigger bonuses, right? But combined with those and her massive growths, it's actually really easy to get her to the point where she takes literally no damage from anything. And that's kind of cracked. It's kind of incredible. So I think that she ends up being like technically kind of an S, but it doesn't feel like one because you're like 2 or 3 levels away from just, yes, her HP is super, super low, but in a couple of levels that won't matter. And like, even at base, 28 resistance, like effectively 28 resistance, effectively 23 defense. She's pretty freaking tanky at base. The thing that holds her back, of course, is this. Like, yeah. And then 14 HP is pretty low even with those. To the point where, like, you know, 23 defense, even if she wasn't taking effective damage, she would get 2 shot by this guy, right? She gets 1 shot by him because of effective damage, but, yeah, the enemies are pretty strong right now. That said, Seer can absolutely fucking tank after just a couple of levels, and I think that weirdly elevates her above like a lot of other S, just because there isn't really a long training arc. It's similar to Myrrh in that, like, there is a training arc. People like to pretend there isn't one, but it's not that long, and enemies in this game and the player units are less tanky, and enemies are more threatening than in Sacred Stones. So as a result, getting someone who can like just get to that point where she's tanked by everything is a lot more valuable than it would be in another game. So Renm is the first one. She's just kind of like a mediocre sniper, 10 strength, 18 speed, an extra point of move, not really sure why. Comes with Quicksilver, but anyone can use it, which is a longbow with the Luna effect, and then also a silver bow. Quicksilver is going to be very useful. Not on Renm, but in general, it will be used by Shale, because Shale's our bow user, our primary bow user. Renm's stats leave a lot to be desired. Skill and luck and speed are very high, so like, doubling and hitting things very accurately is the name of the game. the more notable thing about Renmire, rather than just like being a fairly generic-ish sniper, you know, nothing really special going on in the stats department, is the recruitment. Because Renmire is here, but only temporarily, except for maybe permanently. There's an event tied to Renmire where you can get the black gem, which Renmire has been looking for. And Renmire will approach you, she'll ask like, hey, can you give me that? If you give it to her, she will stay with you, and give you a warp and rescue staff as thank you. If you don't give it to her, or you just don't get it, because it's in a chest on this map, she'll leave at the end. She'll leave if you don't give it to her, and she'll leave if you don't get it, like, just looking for it later. So that's kind of interesting. It's pretty cool. The hashtag Orson archetype, if you will. But yeah, she's, as a unit, fairly boring, but as a, like, joining character, her recruitment is the most interesting thing about her. I guess these are kind of, like, they're funny numbers, right? Like, it's very high skill and luck. She's gonna have really, really high accuracy at any point that we care about that. The other, again, not very great as a unit, but very interesting, the Couth. These stats look pretty terrible, and that's because these are not his actual stats. I'll show off the recruitment. It's a hollowed out armor, and it's a build your own character, right? So you can boost strength, defense, and speed. I'm gonna go strength, you can go strength again, and I'm gonna go skill for the last one. And after I get this attack off, I will talk more about the Couth, because Couth is, again, it's a mediocre unit. Like, a general at this point in the game with customizable stats is cool, but it ends up in a situation where, like, you're always lacking in something. Even if you give speed, you'll be lacking in speed, which is why I didn't give speed. I think doubling up on strength and just making the Couth hit really freaking hard is probably the way to go, especially because you do have ways to boost its defense as well, since it comes with an emblem shield, and you also get an emblem shield in an event at the start of this, so you have two different ways to boost people's defense with the emblem shield. Other than that, like, having A rank in every weapon is nice, but it's not close enough that it's going to get S in any of them. There's 3 maps left, including this one, so that's a little bit sad. I've never used the Couth after this map, but if you give the Couth plus strength, you could get the support as well. Do we actually? Fuck it. Couth support. The support is not needed. If you give the Couth plus strength twice, you can kill this guy and get the Brave Sword. Pretty spectacular, right? That's all there is to say. Like, what do you want me to say? Late game general whose, like, stats are always going to be lacking. I like the customizable unit aspect of it. I just wish that this was a unit that came earlier. Also, these are not special. It always has 0 growths. So that's, you know, kind of interesting. They're not very good units. They're not very good units. Let's talk about the 2 new units as well. So we have Kalek and Millicent. The reason I'm talking about them together is they're very similar to each other. They're both sort of Gotos. Like, it's 2 chapters instead of 1 chapter, but they feel very Goto-y, right? They're both Halberdiers. They have an A support with each other, which is Fire Thunder, and that's good because it's offensive. It can get a bunch of crit and get some strength. They both have S rank lances as well, so they can both use the Impaler and the Impaler too. Well, no, actually, Impaler 2 is Kalek's personal. But they can both use the Impaler and Tam's Terror, which are the important ones. Kalek has these stats. Millicent has these stats. So Kalek is faster. Millicent has a little bit less strength, a little bit less speed, significantly more skill, and significantly more defense. Although, with the Impaler 2, Kalek is able to tie that. Millicent's mostly worse. Her combat is just, like, generally worse than Kalek, but capped skill means that in combination with the Halberdier bonus and the crit from support, she can pretty reliably get pretty decent crit rates. If you take a look here with the Brave Lance, she has 50% just from those bonuses without a weapon that has any crit built in, right? So it's not terrible. If you can, like, she's a unit you can actually do a significant amount of crit stacking on. If she had a killer weapon, it would be over 50%, it would be like 80%. So yeah, pretty interesting units. I like both of them. I end up using them both in this map, and often using Kalek in the next map as well. But yeah, it's weird talking about them because, like, I almost feel like Gotos kind of need their own Goto tier. They are around, but not very much, and they're good while they're around. It's not like a situation where they show up and they don't do anything. Like, they'll be appreciated, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know where to put them, honestly. I have to think about that. We have Alicia and Finwald. These are, honestly, very similar to the previous units in that they are Gotos, and there's not that much to say about them. Starting with S rank in all 3 ranks is very nice, because it means we finally have someone who can use the Alicia's Fang. We finally have an Impaler user who doesn't have like 5 strength. Tam's turret on you as well. Yeah, Alicia is a Falco Knight. Slightly worse combat, but in exchange for better mobility, and that she has higher move and flight, which isn't a huge deal, but there are columns that can kind of make sense. The bigger thing is she has 2 more move, and Finwald has slightly better combat, although he has 5 less speed, which occasionally matters, but usually actually doesn't. In exchange for 2 less move. Not that much else to say about them. Like, they're around for 1 map. They're useful on that 1 map, but yeah, I don't have too much to say. Sorry if that's disappointing. Bye. Sorry. They're good. I like them. They're only, it's hard to, like, evaluate a unit that's only around for 1 map. It's not like an Athos situation where they, like, stomp the map for free either. Like, they're good on the map, but, like, they don't win on their own like Athos can. And they're also not so bad as to, like, not really be relevant like some other Gotos can be. They're well-designed Gotos. They feel like good anti-soft lock if you're, like, missing some strong units, but they're not going to solo the map on their own.